He didn't send a text. He didn't call. He simply showed up. 6'2", $3,000 suit, and eyes cold enough to freeze the entire Manhattan cocktail bar into silence. Every conversation died. Every glass stopped midair. And there she was, his assistant of 4 years, sitting across from another man, laughing at a joke that wasn't his. Adrian Castellano crossed that room like a man who owned it because he owned everything near it, and he cornered her against the bar with one question that made her blood run cold. Who gave you permission to disappear tonight? What happened next would change both their lives forever. If you're watching this story for the first time, welcome. Stay until the very end, because nothing about this story is what it looks like on the surface. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. The bar was called Lore and Rye, and it sat on the corner of West 52nd and 6th Avenue like it had been there since before Manhattan learned to be pretentious. Dark wood paneling, amber lighting, bartenders who remembered your drink after one visit. It was the kind of place that cost $60 for a cocktail and made you feel like the price was almost fair. Sienna Vale had walked past it dozens of times over 4 years, always on her way somewhere else, always carrying a leather portfolio and a phone pressed to her ear and a brain running 17 parallel tasks at once. Tonight was the first time she had walked through the front door as a customer. She got there 7 minutes early because she was constitutionally incapable of being late to anything. Force of habit. 4 years of organizing Adrian Castellano's entire existence had rewired her internal clock to a level of precision that sometimes frightened her. She could tell you his morning schedule, his preferred seating arrangement on a private jet, his coffee order, 2 shots of espresso, no milk, temperature between 160 and 165 degrees, never hotter because he'd burned his tongue once in 2021 and hadn't forgotten. But she could not tell you the last time she had sat somewhere quiet and done absolutely nothing that mattered to anyone else. Tonight was supposed to be that. She sat at a small table near the window, ordered a gin and tonic she hadn't decided on yet when the waiter appeared, and tried to remember how to breathe like a normal person. Her dress was dark green. She'd bought it 6 months ago and never worn it. Her hair was down, which felt slightly wrong, like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. She was 31 years old and she felt slightly costumed, which was its own particular kind of embarrassing. The date's name was Marcus Webb. A friend had set it up, her coworker Danny, who had been trying to fix her up with someone for the better part of 2 years, with the particular relentlessness of a woman who had recently gotten engaged and now viewed every single person in her life as a project. Marcus was a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm in Midtown. He was reportedly kind, reportedly funny, reportedly the kind of man who showed up when he said he would and didn't make it weird. Sienna stared at the door and told herself this was good, this was healthy, this was what living looked like. Marcus walked in 4 minutes after the hour, which already put him at a disadvantage, and she immediately hated herself for clocking it. He was pleasant looking, sandy hair, a blue blazer that fit him well, a smile that arrived on his face easily and looked genuine. He spotted her, raised a hand in that casual wave of recognition that said, "I'm not nervous at all," even though she could tell from the way he checked his collar twice that he absolutely was. "Sienna," he said, pulling out the chair across from her. "You look—" "Sorry, I'm not going to lead with a compliment. That always sounds rehearsed." "Danny told you not to, didn't she?" Sienna said. "She sent me a 3-point list of what not to say." "She sent me a 5-point list." Marcus laughed, surprised, genuine, and sat down. "Okay, that's actually kind of reassuring." It was a decent start, better than she'd expected. The waiter came, they ordered. Marcus asked her questions about her work without immediately pivoting to talk about his own, which put him ahead of roughly half the men Sienna had ever encountered in professional settings. She found herself relaxing incrementally, the knot between her shoulder blades loosening 1 millimeter at a time. She didn't talk about Adrian specifically. She rarely did. She referred to her employer as the company or the executive I support, which was vague enough to be technically truthful. She had a carefully maintained habit of not explaining Adrian Castellano to people who didn't already know who he was. Partly because it invited questions she didn't want to answer, partly because any explanation she gave immediately prompted the follow-up she hated most. What's he actually like? She never knew how to answer that honestly. Marcus was telling her about a hiking trip he'd taken to the Catskills 2 summers ago when the atmosphere inside Lore and Rye changed. It was subtle enough that Sienna almost missed it. A slight shift in the ambient sound level, the way background noise compresses when something enters a room that commands attention without trying. The bartender glanced up. The couple near the entrance turned their heads. The 2 men in suits by the far wall suddenly sat differently, straighter, their eyes moving to the door. She felt it before she saw it. Then the door opened. He didn't burst in. Adrian Castellano never burst anywhere. He moved the way pressure moves, steady, total, and impossible to ignore. He was wearing a charcoal suit she recognized because she had selected it herself from the dry cleaning order last Tuesday. 3-button jacket, no tie, the kind of construction that probably cost more than Marcus Webb earned in a month. His hair was dark and he had not shaved, which was unusual for a Tuesday evening, and his jaw had that particular set it got when he was not happy. He was not happy. 2 men entered slightly ahead of him, quiet, wide-shouldered, their eyes moving in that systematic way that Sienna had learned to recognize as professional threat assessment. 3 more followed a half-step behind. The security presence was minimal by Adrian's standards, but it was enough to make the bar feel smaller. Then he looked at her. The room was still moving, still making its little restaurant sounds, but it felt completely silent in the 7-foot radius between them. Sienna's gin and tonic sat untouched in her hand. Marcus was mid-sentence about a trail marker being knocked over by wind. Adrian crossed the room. He moved between tables without looking at them, like they rearranged themselves out of his way, which perhaps they did. Sienna had watched furniture get moved ahead of him enough times that she was no longer fully sure. He stopped at the edge of their table, and he looked at Marcus for approximately 1 second, the kind of look that took complete inventory and found nothing alarming and nothing interesting. And then he looked at Sienna. "Mr. Castellano." Her voice came out even. She was proud of herself for that. "This is a personal evening." "Yes," he said. "I can see that." His voice was the same as it always was. Low, measured, the kind of voice that implied it never needed to be raised to be heard. But there was something underneath it tonight that she'd heard before and never fully named. A tightness that wasn't anger exactly, but lived in the same neighborhood. Marcus had gone very still. Adrian leaned one hand on the edge of the table, not aggressively, not quite, and looked at her the way he looked at legal documents he was about to renegotiate. "I need a word. I'm in the middle of dinner." 2 minutes. "Mr. Castellano, who gave you permission to disappear tonight?" The words dropped into the room like something heavy dropped into still water. Sienna felt the temperature of her own face shift. Marcus looked between them with the expression of a man who had just realized he was not the most significant person in this particular situation and was trying to decide how he felt about that. Sienna put her glass down. She stood up slowly, with the deliberate care of someone choosing each motion. She smoothed the front of her dress, and she looked at Adrian with the particular expression she had developed over 4 years. The one that said, "I will do this, but understand that I am not happy and I will remember." And she said to Marcus quietly, "Give me 2 minutes. I apologize." Marcus nodded. He looked relieved, honestly, in the way of someone who has just been granted permission to stop pretending he was comfortable. She walked Adrian to the far end of the bar, past the 2 security men who repositioned without being asked, to a narrow space between a decorative column and the wall where the ambient noise from the room created something close to privacy. She turned and faced him, arms crossed, and kept her voice low and flat. "This is not a work matter. I'm aware." "Then why are you here?" He looked at her for a moment too long. That was the thing about Adrian. He always took slightly more time than expected before speaking, and in that gap your brain filled in every possible version of what was about to be said, and most of them were worse than the reality. Usually. "You didn't tell anyone where you were going tonight," he said. "I'm not required to." "No." He agreed with that. Just agreed with it, which surprised her. "You're not." "Then I'll go back to my, I had Thomas run a check on your location when you didn't respond to the Donovan file message." Sienna stopped. "I sent you that file at 5:48. I was off the clock at 6. The message was sent at 6:15. I was off the clock. I know. His jaw moved. I know that. I'm telling you what happened. You tracked my phone because I didn't respond to a work message after work hours, she said, and her voice was still quiet because she had extensive practice keeping it quiet in circumstances that warranted the opposite. And then you physically came to wherever my phone was located. That's accurate. Adrian. She almost never used his first name. His full name, occasionally, when the situation demanded a reset. His title, Mr. Castellano, when she needed professional distance. His first name, almost never. It came out of her now like a small door swinging open. Do you understand how this looks? I understand exactly how it looks. Then explain to me why, because something is wrong. The way he said it stopped her. Not the words themselves. Adrian frequently described situations as wrong with the calm precision of a man whose definition of wrong encompassed things most people would describe as catastrophic. But the way he said it this time was different. There was no calculation behind it. Just the information, stripped of the usual architecture of control he built around everything. She looked at him. He was looking past her shoulder, not at Marcus, not at the room, at something she couldn't see, and his eyes had the particular quality they got when he was running through threat scenarios in real time. Sienna, he said quietly, I need you to stand exactly where you are and not react. What? Don't turn around. Every trained instinct she'd developed over 4 years of working for a man who operated at the intersection of legitimate empire and something considerably less legitimate told her to do exactly what he said. She went still. Her heart rate shifted upward, not sharply, but noticeably. 3 men came in behind me, Adrian said. They'd been tracking the perimeter of the room for 4 minutes. They sat at the bar 6 feet to my right when I entered. I counted their movement. They are not here for the cocktails. Your people? My people are already repositioning. Keep looking at me. Keep your face exactly the way it is right now. Slightly annoyed. That's perfect. She would have laughed at that if the information were less alarming. That's perfect. Like being told her expression was photogenic in a business headshot. Who are they? She said. Varga Organization. The name meant something to her in the abstract. She'd heard it in context over 4 years, fragments of phone calls she wasn't supposed to overhear but did because her desk was 17 feet from his office door, and he sometimes forgot the glass wasn't as thick as he thought. Varga was a name that made other powerful men change their voice when they said it. That was the most she'd known. What do they want? She said. Adrian's eyes came back to hers, and she saw it then. The thing she hadn't been able to name when he walked across the room. The thing she had first read as anger and then as jealousy and now understood was neither. It was fear, not the performed concern of a man managing a situation, something older and more honest than that, something that had been sitting underneath the controlled surface of him for longer than tonight. They want to know who you are, he said. I'm your assistant. Not to them. To them you were nobody. He stopped. Something moved behind his eyes. Until tonight. What happened tonight? I walked into a bar, he said quietly, and looked straight at you, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras. He said it like a man confessing something, like a man who had made a calculation error so fundamental that naming it aloud was its own kind of damage. In 4 years I have never done that. I have never indicated in any observable setting that you are anything to me beyond a scheduling function. Sienna stared at him. Every piece of intelligence my enemies have compiled about my operation, he continued, still quiet, still measured, but underneath it something she'd never heard before, something unsteady. Does not contain your name. Your title exists in the documentation as a rotating position. Different name every contract year. Thomas handles the paperwork. You were, invisible. Were, she repeated. Lucien Varga's people are not amateur. They will have your face on camera by now, name by morning. His hand moved, not reaching for her, but toward her, stopping just short, fingers curling back. I should not have come here. Then why did you? He didn't answer right away. The bar hummed around them, completely unaware of what was happening inside its ambient warmth. Marcus Webb was probably checking his phone by now or signaling the waiter. 40 feet away, three men who worked for someone who made Adrian Castellano's voice go tight were sitting at the bar, and they had already identified her face. "I saw the location on the tracking app," Adrian said finally, "and I saw the restaurant, and I sat in the car for 11 minutes not going inside." He stopped again. The pause was longer than his pauses usually were. "Then I went inside." Sienna was very quiet for a moment. "You sat outside for 11 minutes, she said. "Yes." "And then you came in anyway?" "Yes." "Because I was having dinner with someone." He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He looked at her the way he sometimes looked at a document that represented an irreversible commitment, a look that had cost something to maintain. "The situation is what it is," he said. "Right now, I need you to walk back to your table, say whatever you need to say, and be at the south exit in 90 seconds. Marcus," he said the name without inflection, "will be fine. He is not the target. I'm the target. You will be. By tomorrow at latest." She held his gaze for a moment. She was angry, not the clean kind of angry that clarifies everything, but the complicated, layered kind that comes from learning something you'd half known for a long time and hadn't let yourself fully look at. 4 years. 4 years of structured distance and professional exactness, and a man who had memorized her coffee order and her calendar and apparently every potential threat to her safety, and had kept her invisible from it all with the same systematic care he applied to offshore accounts and acquisition deals. 4 years of believing the distance was indifference. 90 seconds, she said. "Sienna." Something in his voice stopped her. Not a request, not an order, just her name, said in a way that was different from how he usually said it, like it cost something. "I'm sorry for this." A beat. "For all of it." She walked back to the table. Marcus looked up with the careful neutrality of a man trying very hard not to ask questions he suspected would not receive comfortable answers. Sienna sat down. She picked up her gin and tonic, and she took one sip because she needed something to do with her hands, and because she had learned over 4 years that controlled small actions and pressurized moments kept her brain from catastrophizing ahead of the available information. "I need to go," she said. Marcus nodded, slowly. "Yeah, I figured." "I'm genuinely sorry. This is not the evening I planned." "Is everything okay?" She looked at him. He had kind eyes. He had shown up almost on time. He had not led with a compliment. Under almost any other version of tonight, he might have been worth a second dinner. "I honestly don't know yet," she said. She stood, got her coat, left $40 on the table that covered more than her share, and walked toward the south exit. She did not look back at Adrian. She did not look at the 3 men at the bar. She counted her footsteps because it kept the panic organized. The south exit opened onto a side street, narrow and dim, the kind of Manhattan alley that existed primarily to move things discreetly between the front of buildings and the world behind them. An armored SUV, dark gray, no visible plates from this angle, was already there, engine running, rear door open. She stopped. The rational part of her brain, the part that had survived 4 years in close proximity to a man whose definition of a normal business day would constitute a thriller novel for most people, was processing the sequence of information calmly. Real threat, confirmed by his reaction, confirmed by 4 years of a security architecture she'd never fully understood. The other part of her brain, the part that had put on a green dress tonight and sat down across from a man named Marcus in a bar she'd always meant to visit, was noting with a cold precision that she was about to get into a car she hadn't chosen going somewhere she hadn't decided, because a man who had tracked her phone had walked into her one private evening and dismantled it with 11 words. She felt the fury of that very clearly. She got in the car anyway. Adrian got in 30 seconds later. The door closed. The SUV moved. "Where are we going?" she said. "Away from here. I'll explain everything." "You'll explain it now." "Sienna?" "Right now, Adrian, before this car goes another 3 blocks. He looked at her. In the dim interior of the moving vehicle, his expression had none of the armored quality it usually carried. He looked for a moment like a man who had been keeping something very heavy in one place for a very long time and had just been told he was no longer allowed to put it down. "Everything you've handled for me," he said quietly. "Every schedule, every communication protocol, every encrypted transfer, every meeting arrangement, every security clearance pathway, you managed all of it. You built systems around all of it." He stopped. "And I let you. Because you were exceptional at it. Because the business ran better with you than without you, and I told myself that was all it was." The SUV turned west. The city moved past the tinted windows in amber streaks. "Lucien Varga has been building a case against my organization for 14 months, Adrian continued. "He's not law enforcement. He wants leverage. He has been looking for a single point of contact, one person who has access to enough of my operation to be useful as a pressure point or an intelligence source." He looked out the window. "In 4 years he found nothing. Because you were invisible. Because I made certain you were invisible." He paused. "Because I had reasons for that beyond operational security, and those reasons were not entirely professional, and I allowed myself to believe that my personal reasons were irrelevant as long as the professional outcome held." Sienna watched his profile in the passing light. "You've been protecting me," she said. "Poorly, as it turns out. Because you came into the bar. Because I sat outside for 11 minutes. His voice was even. "If I had stayed in the car, you would have finished dinner, gone home, and been safe. Nothing would have changed." He turned to look at her. "I know that. I have known that since the moment I stepped out of the vehicle." The next block passed in silence. "Why didn't you stay in the car?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. The driver's partition was up. The security team in the follow vehicle was not privy to this conversation. In the sealed space of the moving SUV, there was just the two of them, 4 years of professional architecture and a question that had been sitting somewhere unnamed for longer than tonight. "Because," Adrian said finally, and his voice had something in it she had never once heard from him in any professional context. Something raw and tired and stripped of strategy. "I have been pretending for 4 years that I am capable of not caring what happens to you. And tonight I discovered that the pretending has a limit." Sienna looked at him for a long time. Outside, Manhattan moved at its usual speed, indifferent to everything happening inside this vehicle, inside this conversation, inside the 4-year structure that had just fractured along lines that had been there from the beginning. Then her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. 4 words. "We already know, Sienna." The SUV kept moving. Adrian glanced at her face and saw something change in it and reached for the phone without asking, because in 4 years she had learned to hand things to him in moments of threat without debating the gesture. He read the message. His jaw set. "They moved faster than I estimated," he said quietly. "How did they get this number?" she said. "This is my personal phone. It's not connected to any. Bar cameras have facial recognition uplink capabilities in 6 establishments within this city that I'm aware of." He was already typing on his own phone. "Varga's people have access to at least 3. They needed 15 minutes to run your image through a public database. Your name is on your lease. Your lease is linked to your financial records. Your financial records have a primary employer listed." He stopped typing, looked at her. "You have been identified." The car was moving faster now. Sienna sat with the weight of that information, feeling it settle into the spaces that had been filled 30 minutes ago, with the minor anxiety of a first date and a dress she'd never worn, and a man who had shown up almost on time. That version of tonight felt like it had happened to someone else. "They know where I live," she said. "Yes." "My apartment? Thomas is already handling it. Your building is being monitored. You will not be going home tonight." He paused. "Or for the foreseeable future." She turned to look at him fully then, and the anger was still there. It hadn't gone anywhere. It didn't intend to. But underneath it was something she hadn't expected to feel in this car tonight, in this version of events. Something that had more to do with 11 minutes than with 3 men at a bar, or a tracking application, or the organized dismantling of the private evening she'd planned. He had sat outside for 11 minutes. He had chosen to walk in. He had blown 4 years of careful protection in one moment of something he couldn't fully name, and he had told her so with the particular honesty of a man who almost never allowed himself that. She was furious. She was also, underneath the fury, in a place she didn't have language for yet. "You said you'd explain everything," she said. "Yes. All of it. Not the security logistics, all of it." He met her eyes. "Yes." The SUV turned north, away from the city, towards something she couldn't see yet from where she was sitting. Her phone was dark in her lap. The text was still there, 4 words, patient as a blade. "We already know, Sienna." And the man sitting 3 feet from her, who had memorized her and protected her, and destroyed his own careful system in 11 minutes of weakness or honesty or both, stared straight ahead as Manhattan fell behind them, his jaw tight, his eyes working through something she hadn't been given access to yet. But she would be. He had promised her that much. And in 4 years of working for Adrian Castellano, the one thing she had learned that she would have bet her life on, and as it turned out, might be doing exactly that, was that he kept his promises. Even the ones that cost him everything to make. The estate materialized out of darkness, the way expensive things often do. Gradually, then all at once. Sienna had lost track of time somewhere around the 40-minute mark, when the city lights thinned and the highway gave way to a 2-lane road that climbed steadily through pine and granite. She had stopped watching the window after that. Instead, she watched Adrian, who sat with his phone in one hand and made 4 calls in the space of 20 minutes, each one brief, each one delivered in the quiet, controlled cadence of a man issuing directives he fully expected to be followed. She caught fragments. North perimeter, rotation schedule. The Donovan line is frozen until further notice. His voice never rose. It never wavered. Whatever he was feeling, and she had seen enough of it in the bar to know something was moving beneath the surface. It had been fully rehoused behind the familiar architecture of operational control. She found that almost more disturbing than the text message sitting on her phone. The SUV passed through 2 gate checkpoints before the main structure appeared in the headlights. A stone and timber building set into the mountain face like it had grown there, massive without being ostentatious, its windows throwing rectangles of amber light across a stone forecourt. Security personnel were already stationed at intervals she recognized as a specific defensive formation. Whatever Thomas had communicated ahead of their arrival had been received and acted on. She got out of the car before anyone opened her door. Small assertion of autonomy, possibly childish. She didn't care. The air was cold and sharp and carried the smell of pine resin and elevation, and it hit her like a correction, like the world insisting she was still in a body, still breathing, still a physical person in a physical location, and not just a collection of decisions being made around her. She stood on the stone forecourt for a moment and breathed it in. Adrian came around the front of the SUV and stopped a few feet away. He watched her do this, breathe, with an expression she couldn't categorize. Not impatience, not analysis, something quieter than both. "Come inside," he said. "In a minute." He didn't push it. That was one of the things that had always unsettled her about him, his capacity to wait. Most men in his position, with his level of structural authority, filled silence with more noise. Adrian went still in it. He went still now, hands in his jacket pockets, and waited while she stood on his forecourt and got her bearings in the cold mountain air. When she finally moved toward the entrance, he fell into step beside her. Not ahead, beside. She noticed that too. The interior of the estate was warmer than she expected and less imposing. She had built a version of this place in her imagination over 4 years, constructed from the sparse references Adrian made to it. "I'll be at the property this weekend. Hold all non-urgent calls." And the version she'd imagined was harder, colder, more fortress than home. The reality had stone floors covered in worn rugs and bookshelves that looked actively used, and a fireplace in the main room that someone had recently lit, the wood already settling into a steady burn. A woman appeared from a side corridor, mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of face that had decided long ago that it was done apologizing for existing. She looked at Sienna with the neutral assessment of someone who was surprised by nothing and registered her presence with one small nod. "Margaret," Adrian said. "The East Room." "Already prepared," Margaret looked at Sienna again briefly. There's food in the kitchen. It's late, but the range is on. Then she was gone. Sienna stood in the main room with the fire and the bookshelves and the weight of everything the last 90 minutes had deposited on her, and she turned to face Adrian. Start talking, she said. He crossed to the fireplace. Didn't sit. Stood with one arm on the mantel, looking at the fire, and she recognized this position. She had seen him take it in the office sometimes, during phone calls that required him to think rather than react. It was how he organized information before releasing it. Lucien Varga, he said, took over his father's operation 8 years ago. He is smarter than his father was and more patient and significantly more dangerous because he prefers strategic leverage to direct violence. He has spent the last 14 months building a legal and criminal case against my organization simultaneously. The idea being that one of those avenues would eventually produce results. The legitimate side of my business is largely clean. The infrastructure it runs on is not. He paused. You know this. I know enough of it, Sienna said. You know more than enough of it. That's the point. He turned from the fire. Every encrypted transfer routing protocol in the financial division goes through a communication system you restructured 18 months ago. The schedule architecture you built, the one that coordinates the legal entities with the physical logistics of the less legal ones, is the single most sophisticated organizational system I have ever operated within. You built it in 11 weeks, and it has not had a critical failure in 16 months. She stared at him. You're telling me, she said slowly, that I built the backbone of your entire operation. I'm telling you that you are functionally the most operationally significant person in my organization, and that you did it while believing you were optimizing corporate scheduling and financial communications for a very demanding, legitimate businessman. He said it without flinching. I allowed you to believe that. The fire cracked. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. You used me, she said. The work you were doing was real. The compensation was accurate. The professional relationship was... You used me, she said again. Not louder. Harder. He didn't deny it. That was the worst of it. The way he stood there and let the accusation land without deflecting it, without lawyering around it. It would have been easier if he'd argued. She had 4 years of practice managing his arguments. If Varga's people get access to the systems you built, Adrian said, they can map my entire operation in 48 hours. Names, routes, financial structures, pressure points. 14 months of intelligence gathering that produce nothing becomes a complete organizational chart. Every person who works for me, including the ones who work for me without fully understanding what that means, becomes identifiable. He stopped. That includes you. I didn't know what I was building, she said. I know. That isn't an excuse for you. You know that. Yes. You sat across from me every day for 4 years, and you let me... She stopped herself, pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. The fury was still there, but it had shifted shape, become something more complicated than clean anger, and she didn't have the bandwidth right now to unpick all the layers of what it meant. Why didn't you tell me? Because if you knew what you were building, you would have left. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He met her eyes. Because you are one of the most morally precise people I have ever encountered. You have a line, Sienna, and it is not movable. I have watched you hold it against pressure I would not have survived professionally, and you have never compromised it once. Something moved in his expression. If I had told you on the front end what the systems would be used for, you would have walked out of that interview and I would never have seen you again. The room held that for a moment. And you didn't want that, she said. He looked at the fire again. The angle of his jaw was rigid. No, he said. I didn't. She sat down, not because she wanted to, but because her legs made the decision ahead of her conscious mind, which had started processing the full weight of what she was hearing and found it considerable. She sat in the leather chair nearest the fire and looked at the man standing 4 feet from her. This man she had organized, scheduled, anticipated, and argued with for 4 years. This man whose coffee temperature preference and risk tolerance and particular silences she knew better than she knew most people she'd chosen to know. And she tried to reconcile what she was hearing with every version of him she'd constructed and discarded over those 4 years. The protection, she said. The invisible in the documentation thing. The different name on contracts every year. Thomas handles all direct administrative contact with your financial records. Your lease was negotiated through a shell LLC that has no visible connection to any Castellano entity. Your name does not appear in any organizational chart, any security filing, any operational document. He paused. I built that system in your first month. Your first month? There was a board meeting in your third week. A member made a comment about the quality of administrative support, referenced you specifically, by a description that made clear he'd been paying more attention to you than to the agenda. His voice was even, but something underneath it had gone cold. I had the documentation restructured the following Monday. Sienna was quiet for a moment. 4 years ago, she said. Yes. You built a security architecture around me in my first month. Yes. That is... She stopped. Started again. Most people would call that surveillance. Most people would be right. But you're going to tell me it was protection. I'm going to tell you it was both, he said, because that's accurate, and I'm not going to clean it up for you. It was surveillance and it was protection, and the line between those two things in my world is sometimes thinner than I would like it to be. He turned away from the fire and sat down across from her, elbows on his knees, and she noticed for the first time that he looked tired. Not the managed fatigue of a man who hadn't slept. Something older than that. The tiredness of sustained effort that had been going on long enough to stop being visible and start being structural. I am not going to present this as uncomplicated. It isn't. I know what it is and I know what it looks like, and I know there are parts of it you're going to be angry about for longer than tonight. That's a significant understatement, she said. I know. You tracked my phone. I have a standing alert on your location during high-risk periods. Tonight was not flagged as high risk. The alert triggered automatically when you went to an unregistered location at an unusual hour. The system generated a notification. He stopped. I made the choice to act on it. And to act on it, you decided to personally, yes. Adrian. She said his name the same way she'd said it in the bar, that small door swinging open. You are a man who commands approximately 60 people on any given security detail. You could have sent someone to verify I was safe. You could have had Thomas send a message. You could have... I know what I could have done. Then why? Because it was you. His voice came out slightly differently than intended. She could tell from the microsecond adjustment in his expression that he'd heard it too, the way those 3 words landed without their usual containment. He straightened, controlled it. But the words were already out there, sitting in the fire-lit room between them, and neither of them was going to pretend they weren't. Because it was you, he said again, quieter, deliberate this time. And I stopped being capable of the appropriate professional response approximately 2 years ago, and I have been managing that failure very carefully ever since. The fire shifted, a log settled. Sienna looked at him with an expression that she was not sure she could have named if someone had asked her to, that existed somewhere in the territory between fury and something she hadn't given herself permission to examine. 2 years, she said, at minimum. You have been... She stopped. For 2 years you have been maintaining professional conduct, he said. Correctly, appropriately, because you were my employee and you did not sign up for anything beyond that, and I was not going to, I would not put you in that position. And tonight I sat outside a bar for 11 minutes and lost an argument with myself. The line of his mouth was tight. That hasn't happened to me in a long time. Sienna pressed her palms against her knees and stared at the fire and did not say anything for almost a full minute. In that minute, she ran through every interaction she could access from the last 4 years. Every meeting, every instruction, every silence, every moment where she had read something in his behavior and filed it under demanding employer or exceptionally private man or not my business and moved on. She had been very disciplined about moving on. She had been disciplined about a lot of things over 4 years. She thought about the board member in her third week. The comment she hadn't known about until this moment. The system restructured the following Monday. She thought about the way he always faced the door of whatever room they were in when she was present. The way he knew when she was tired before she said so. The way certain phone calls got made from a different room when she was nearby. as if proximity to her changed what he was willing to have her hear. She thought about tonight. A man sitting in an armored vehicle outside a bar, engaged in an 11-minute argument with himself, and losing. She thought about Marcus Webb, who had kind eyes and had shown up almost on time and was probably home by now, thoroughly baffled. She thought about the text message. "We already know, Sienna." "I need to know something," she said. "Ask it." "When you say Vargas people have identified me, what does that mean in practice? What happens next?" He shifted. The personal conversation boxed itself back up with the efficiency of long practice, replaced by operational precision. She watched it happen and didn't decide how she felt about it. "They will attempt contact first," he said. "Leverage before force. It's Vargas' methodology. They'll reach out through an intermediary to establish that they have you identified. They want me to know they have the card before they play it. It gives them negotiating position. And if you don't negotiate, they move to direct action. That could mean surveillance, it could mean an approach, someone trying to access you directly, get you to talk about the systems you built, pull operational information. And if I don't cooperate with them," his jaw set, "then it escalates." "To what?" He didn't answer that one immediately. "Adrian." "To something I am not going to let happen," he said. Flat. Final. "That's the only answer I'm giving you on that question. That's not Sienna." He leaned forward slightly. "I understand that you have every right to complete information about the threat you're facing, and I will give you all of it. But there are categories within that information that I need you to trust me on, at least for tonight. Because if I give you everything at once right now, you're going to spend the night in a mental state that is counterproductive to both of us, and I need you functional tomorrow." She stared at him. "Did you just tell me to manage my emotional response for operational efficiency? I told you I need you functional tomorrow. Those are different things." "They are absolutely not different things." "Sienna, do not," she said, and her voice had gone quiet in the particular way that in the office made his entire staff go still. "Manage me right now. Do you understand? You do not get to track my phone and blow my cover and drag me out of my first evening off in 4 months and then tell me to stay calm because it's more convenient for you." The room was very quiet. He looked at her. Something moved through his expression. Not defensiveness, she realized. Not irritation. Something more honest than either of those. "You're right," he said. She blinked. In 4 years, she could count on one hand the number of times he had deployed those two words without immediate qualification. "You're right," he said again. I'm defaulting to operational framing because it's what I do when I don't know how to handle something, and right now I don't know how to handle this." He sat back. The tiredness was showing again, and he wasn't managing it this time. "I've spent 4 years being very good at knowing how to handle everything that concerns you, and right now I have made a significant error and damaged something I cannot quantify the value of, and I am operating without a framework for this situation." Sienna looked at him for a long moment. "Welcome to how normal people feel all the time," she said. Something shifted in his face. Almost, something that in another context might have been humor. "Yes," he said. "I'm beginning to understand that." She pulled her phone out and looked at the text message again. The timestamp was 53 minutes old. 4 words, patient and precise and deeply unwelcome. "Can they use this number to locate me now?" "The device has been flagged. Thomas will have a replacement sent up by morning. For tonight, it's isolated from any active network. The security team handled that when we arrived." He paused. "You're safe here. For now." "For now," she repeated. "This property is not connected to my name in any documentation that Vargas' organization could have accessed. They will eventually find it. I am not going to tell you otherwise. But it will take them time. Days, possibly a week. And then what? Then we will have had that time to do what needs to be done." "Which is what exactly?" He met her eyes. "End it." She held his gaze. "End it how?" "There is a file," he said. "I have been building it for 11 months. Vargas' financial laundering network, his political infrastructure, the names of 6 law enforcement officials in 3 jurisdictions who are on his payroll. The operational record of 2 acquisitions he made through means that would interest a federal prosecutor significantly." He stopped. It is comprehensive enough to end him professionally, criminally, and organizationally. I have held it unused because deploying it requires revealing certain aspects of my own intelligence gathering operation that I would prefer to keep private. But the calculus changed tonight. Sienna was quiet for a moment. You were saving it. I was saving it for a situation that required it. And tonight is that situation. Tonight is that situation, he confirmed. She looked at the fire, thought about Lucien Varga, who she had never met, who had spent 14 months building a case and had found a weakness in 11 minutes because a man she worked for had sat in a car outside a bar and lost an argument with himself. Thought about the systems she'd built. 11 weeks of work she'd been proud of, genuinely proud of, the kind of satisfaction that comes from taking something chaotic and making it elegant and efficient. Turns out she'd been solving the wrong problem, or the right problem for the wrong people, or something in between that she wasn't sure she had language for yet. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask it. The work I did, the systems, did any of it facilitate anything that hurt someone? The question sat between them. Adrian looked at her with the particular attention he gave things that mattered. He didn't answer immediately, which in another context would have alarmed her. In this context, she read it as the opposite of evasion, as someone taking the question seriously enough not to answer it carelessly. The financial transfers that your routing system optimized include capital flows from operations that are illegal under federal statute, he said. Those operations are trafficking of a financial nature, not people. He said the last two words with a specificity that felt deliberate. I have never operated in those categories. I have lines. Financial trafficking that funds what? Primarily enforcement infrastructure and political access. He paused. The people who use my transfer systems are not good people. I will not tell you they are. The money that passes through structures you helped build comes from sources that would not survive daylight. I knew that when I let you build those structures, you didn't. He held her gaze. That is my responsibility, not yours. That's not as comforting as you think it is, she said. I know. I built the pipes, and the pipes carried whatever someone decided to put in them. Yes. And you decided what went in them. Yes. She pressed her hands against her face for a moment, breathed, took stock of what was in her body. Fury, exhaustion, something underneath those two things that she still couldn't name, but that had been growing since 11 minutes outside a bar, and a man who'd said because it was you without meaning to say it. Okay, she said from behind her hands. Okay, he repeated. She lowered her hands. I'm not okay with it. I want you to understand that. I'm not absolved from it by the fact that I didn't know, and you're not absolved from it by the fact that you're now telling me. We are going to have a very long and very uncomfortable conversation about all of this when we are not actively running from someone. Yes, he said, we are. But right now I need to know what you need from me to end this. The Varga situation. He looked at her steadily. There are 11 files in the communication system you built that contain the archive I was describing. They are encrypted under a key structure that I designed, but the retrieval protocol is routed through the scheduling architecture you created. I need to access those files through that architecture, and I need someone who knows the system from the inside to do it, without triggering the security flags that will alert Varga's monitoring software. He stopped. I need you. Sienna looked at him. You need me to use the system I built without knowing what it was to access information that will destroy the man who has identified me because you came into a bar. That is accurate. That's... She stopped. I know what it is. That's... She said it again, and then she stopped again because she didn't have the right word. There were several words that applied, but none of them were sufficient, and she was too tired and too angry and too something unnamed to find the one that fit. The fire burned. Outside, somewhere in the dark of the mountain, the security rotation moved in its careful patterns. The world that had existed this morning, the one with the green dress and Marcus Webb and a cocktail bar she'd always meant to visit, was not technically gone, but it was on the other side of something that she was not certain she could cross back over. She became aware, in the specific way you become aware of things when shock starts to metabolize, that she was very tired. Not just tonight tired, 4 years tired. The kind of tired that accumulates when you spend a long time being excellent at something that costs more than you charge for it. I need to sleep, she said. Adrian nodded. He stood. Margaret will show you the East Room. There are clothes. He stopped. Started again with slightly less smoothness than usual. There are appropriate clothes in the room. Margaret keeps the guest room stocked. It's not another small stop. They're not yours. I didn't think they were mine, she said. Something moved in his expression that he shut down quickly. She stood, moved toward the door, stopped. Adrian. He waited. When you said you stopped being capable of the appropriate professional response 2 years ago, she didn't turn around. What changed 2 years ago? The fire settled. A beat of silence. You had pneumonia, he said. February. You were out for 6 days, and He stopped. I functioned. Everything ran. Thomas covered what needed covering, but The sentence didn't complete itself. I had a week to understand the difference between the work you do and another stop, and everything else. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Good night, Adrian, she said. Good night? She walked down the stone corridor toward the East Room, and behind her the fire burned on in a room where a man who had spent 4 years managing the distance between what he was and what he couldn't stop being stood alone with the weight of an 11-minute decision and its consequences, which had only just begun. She found the East Room and found the clothes, a soft set, gray, folded with the precision of someone who took that kind of thing seriously. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment before changing, and she looked at her phone, which was useless and dark, and sitting on the nightstand like an artifact from 3 hours ago when she'd been a woman on a first date in a green dress with the smallest possible ambitions for the evening. She thought about what he'd said. February, 6 days. The difference between the work you do and everything else. She thought about the system she'd built without knowing what she was building. She thought about Lucien Varga, whose name she'd heard in corridor fragments, who had spent 14 months looking for a pressure point and had found one in 11 minutes because a man had lost an argument with himself in the front seat of an armored vehicle. She thought about because it was you. She was still thinking when sleep finally made the decision for her, pulling her under with the unceremonious efficiency of a body that had exceeded its operating threshold. She did not dream about the bar. She did not dream about Adrian. She dreamed about the system she'd built, the elegant scheduling architecture, the clean routing protocols, the efficient structures she had been so quietly proud of. She dreamed about walking through it like a building, room by room, opening doors. And behind every door she opened, she found something she hadn't put there. She woke at 4 a.m. to the sound of a door closing somewhere in the building. Controlled, not urgent, just the sound of someone moving through a place at an hour when stillness is the default. Then she heard Adrian's voice through the stone wall, low and tight, in a way it hadn't been in the main room. She couldn't make out words, but she could make out the tone. And in 4 years she had only heard that tone in his voice once before. On a phone call she'd accidentally heard through an imperfectly closed office door during a negotiation she'd been told never happened. The tone of a man who had just learned something he had been afraid of learning. She sat up in the dark room and listened to the silence after his voice stopped, and the silence had a quality to it, a particular density, that told her whatever had just been said through that wall had changed the shape of the next 12 hours. She reached for her dead phone out of pure reflex and felt the absence of it like a missing handhold. In the corridor outside, footsteps moved toward her door. Deliberate, not hurried, but not the measured pace of a man with time to waste, and stopped. A knock. 2. Controlled. Sienna. His voice through the door had that quality again, the stripped-down version. I need you awake. Now. She was already standing. What happened? She said. A beat of silence through the door. Varga's people found the estate, he said. We have approximately 4 hours. She stood in the dark room in borrowed gray clothes, 4 hours of sleep in her body, and 4 years of something unnamed settling into something she couldn't walk back from, and she understood, with the clean certainty of a person who has just reached a threshold, that this was the moment everything changed direction. Not in the bar, not in the SUV, not in front of the fire. Now, in the dark, with 4 hours on the clock, and a man's voice through a stone door, and no version of any plan she had ever made for her life that had accounted for any of this. "I'll be ready in 5 minutes," she said. She was dressed in 4 minutes and 40 seconds, not because she was trying to beat her own estimate, because her hands moved with the automatic efficiency of a person whose body had decided, somewhere between the knock and the first button, that there was no longer any bandwidth available for hesitation. She splashed cold water on her face at the sink in the East Room's attached bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror for exactly as long as it took to confirm she was still a coherent person, and then she stopped looking and went to the door. Adrian was in the corridor. He was in different clothes than the night before, dark, practical, the kind of thing that didn't advertise itself, and he had a phone in each hand, which she had never seen before. In 4 years, she had never seen him hold 2 phones simultaneously. The sight of it reorganized her threat assessment faster than anything he could have said. "Talk while we move," he said, already turning. She fell into step beside him. The estate, which had felt warm and amber-lit and almost approachably human 6 hours ago, had transformed in the night into something more accurately itself, a security installation wearing the costume of a home. Lights were on in rooms that had been dark. Personnel she hadn't seen on arrival were now visible at corridor intersections, their positions suggesting a specific defensive geometry she recognized from security protocols she had typed into scheduling documents without fully processing what they described. "How did they find it?" she said. "That's the question." His jaw was doing the thing, the tight horizontal line of it. "This property is documented under a 4th-tier LLC structure that has no visible connection to any Castellano entity. The last full property audit was 14 months ago and returned clean. But someone accessed the documentation." He turned a corner without slowing. The access log on the holding company's records shows an inquiry made at 2:47 this morning. The inquiry was made through a legitimate legal database using credentials belonging to a compliance attorney in the Donovan Group's external counsel. Sienna processed this. "The Donovan Group is my largest legitimate acquisition this year. The legal process is ongoing. External counsel has database access through the deal structure." He stopped at a door at the far end of the corridor and looked at her. "Someone inside that deal used legitimate access to find this property." "Someone inside the deal," she said, "or someone who compromised someone inside the deal. Or both." He pushed the door open. Beyond it was a room she hadn't seen the night before. Large, functional, the kind of space that didn't apologize for what it was. 2 long tables, multiple screens, 3 people she didn't recognize working at stations. The wall opposite the door had a topographic display of the mountain property and its surrounding terrain, with position markers she understood immediately as personnel locations. Thomas was there. Sienna had met Thomas Reyes in her first week, a compact, precise man in his early 40s who functioned as Adrian's operational right hand in all the ways that didn't appear on any organizational chart. He had always treated her with the careful courtesy of someone who knew exactly how much she knew and had made a considered decision about how much that mattered. Tonight he looked at her with an expression that was something else, something she read as an apology that hadn't been approved for verbal delivery. "Thomas," Adrian said, moving to the central table. "Give her the summary." Thomas turned to Sienna. At 2:47 a.m., a records inquiry was made through the Donovan Deal's external counsel database. The inquiry returned this property's holding documentation. At 3:12, a vehicle was observed on the secondary access road at the northeast perimeter. Private plate, no registered contact with any known Varga asset. At 3:31, 2 additional vehicles were observed at the main road junction. They are not currently moving. "They're waiting," Sienna said. "They're confirming the location," Thomas said, "establishing that we're here before they move." 4 hours, Adrian said. "That's the outer estimate before they have enough personnel staged for a meaningful approach." Sienna looked at the topographic display. The personnel markers, Adrian's people, were positioned along the estate's perimeter in the defensive formation she'd clocked in the corridors. There were 12 markers. She counted. 12. "How many does Varga typically move with?" she said. Thomas and Adrian exchanged a look that lasted exactly a quarter of a second. She'd seen that exchange before, in meetings where information was being decided rather than delivered. "Tell her," she said flatly. Adrian looked at the display. In a direct approach to a secured location, Varga's operational history suggests a minimum of 20. 12 versus 20. On terrain Varga's people had just located and her people had held for less than 8 hours. She did the math without wanting to. "The file," she said. "The one you built. The Varga Intelligence Archive. That's why we're here." Adrian moved to the nearest station and turned the screen toward her. She recognized the interface immediately. It was the scheduling architecture she'd built, skinned differently but structurally identical, the same logic trees and routing protocols she'd spent 11 weeks designing. Looking at it now, knowing what she knew, produced a sensation she didn't have a word for. Not quite revulsion. Something more complicated than that, like seeing a photograph of yourself doing something you didn't remember doing. The archive is in 11 encrypted partitions routed through the system. The retrieval key is a 17-character alphanumeric that I hold, but the extraction protocol, the pathway through the system that pulls the files without triggering Varga's monitoring software, runs through the scheduling architecture, which I built, which you know better than anyone alive. He looked at her steadily. "I need you to run the extraction. I'll provide the key. You navigate the system." She looked at the screen for a moment, the familiar architecture, the logic she'd constructed from scratch over 11 weeks, proud of its elegance, proud of its efficiency, not knowing what the efficiency was serving. "If I do this," she said, "if I run this extraction and it works, what happens to the file?" "It goes to 4 recipients simultaneously. A federal prosecutor in the Southern District, a journalist at a publication whose editor I trust, an international oversight body whose brief includes cross-border financial crime, and a copy to an attorney whose instructions are to deploy it in the event of any adverse outcome to this situation. You've had this planned. For 11 months. I was waiting for a trigger condition." "I'm the trigger condition," she said. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. She pulled the chair from the station and sat down. The screen was familiar and alien simultaneously. She put her hands on the keyboard and they went to the right positions automatically, muscle memory from thousands of hours. And she hated that a little. Hated that her body knew the system so well and had never once questioned what it was actually part of. "Give me 10 minutes to map the retrieval path," she said. "Then give me the key and we'll run it." Thomas stepped back. The other personnel in the room redirected their attention with the practiced tact of people who had learned when not to observe. Adrian remained where he was, close enough to be present, far enough to give her the space the work required. She was 4 minutes into the mapping when the first alert hit. Not on her screen, on the topographic display. One of the perimeter markers shifted, a personnel position, moving in a direction that didn't correspond to a rotation pattern. Thomas said sharply, "East perimeter. Kowalski has moved off-grid." Adrian had his phone to his ear before Thomas finished the sentence. "Kowalski." A pause. "Kowalski." He lowered the phone. His face had gone very still. No response. The room contracted. Everyone in it felt it. The shift in what was happening. The gear change from preparation to active problem. "Could be signal," one of the personnel at the far station said. "Pull his tracker," Thomas said. A pause. 3 seconds. 5. "Tracker is stationary," the far station said. "Southeast corner of the east wall. He hasn't moved in..." A pause. "In 6 minutes." 6 minutes was too long for a personnel halt in a rotation pattern. Every person in the room knew this. Nobody said it. "Send Reyes and Callahan to the east wall," Adrian said. Not loudly, with the specific quietness that meant the instruction was not a suggestion. 2 of the personnel moved immediately. Sienna kept her hands on the keyboard, kept working. The retrieval path was taking shape on her screen. She could see the logic of it, the route through the system's architecture that would reach the 11 encrypted partitions without setting off the monitoring flags. She had built this system with redundancies, with fail-safes, with a dozen small features designed to prevent unauthorized access. Now she was using all of it to authorize the most consequential extraction she had ever performed, and her hands were steady, which she found slightly remarkable. 6 minutes passed. Then Reyes's voice came through a speaker on the central table, compressed by transmission, but clear enough. "East wall, he's down. Somebody get medical." Adrian's expression didn't change. That was the most frightening part. The complete absence of surprise. "Varga moved up the timeline," Thomas said. "How far?" Adrian said. "If they've already breached the outer perimeter—" Thomas didn't finish that sentence. "They haven't breached," Adrian said. "They sent one person ahead, a scout or a message, probably both." He looked at Sienna. "How much time do you need?" 8 minutes for the path, 5 for the extraction once I have the key." "You have 6 total," he said. She pulled the map of the system architecture in her head and started cutting corners. Not the ones that mattered, not the fail-safes that would alert Varga's monitoring, but the redundancies she'd built in because she was thorough and had time. She started cutting the thoroughness. Her fingers moved faster. 4 things are going to happen in the next 12 minutes, Adrian said to the room. Not to her specifically, but pitched in a way that included her. First, we complete the extraction. Second, the file goes to its recipients. Third, we move Sienna to the secondary vehicle and take the north route. Fourth, he stopped, looked at the topographic display for a moment. Fourth, I'm going to make a phone call. To who? Thomas said. Lucien. The room went quiet. Not the silence of people who were surprised, the silence of people who had considered this possibility and were now watching it become real. You call him now, Thomas said carefully, before the file is deployed, and you tip him that we have it. I call him now, Adrian said, and I tell him the file is already gone, already with its recipients, and that anything that happens to anyone at this property in the next 12 minutes becomes part of the public record that's already moving. And if he doesn't believe you, he'll believe me. Adrian said it without arrogance, with the specific certainty of a man who had been reading Lucien Varga for long enough to know the topography of his calculations. Because it's what he would do. Sienna's hands kept moving on the keyboard. 8 minutes of work in 5. She could feel the architecture of the system the way you can feel the layout of a room you've lived in. Not by looking, but by knowing. She moved through it by knowing. She was 90 seconds from the retrieval point when Thomas said, Sienna. Something in his voice made her stop. She looked up. Thomas was looking at his screen with an expression that had gone wrong. Not operationally wrong, personally wrong. The kind of expression that precedes information that changes the shape of the room. What? She said. He looked at Adrian first, that was the tell. The fact that he looked at Adrian first and that Adrian met his eyes, and that in the fraction of a second between Thomas looking and Thomas speaking, she saw something pass between the two men. Something that had the quality of a thing that had been known and held and not delivered. The monitoring alert, Thomas said. The one that flagged when Varga's people accessed the property documentation at 247. Yes, she said. The access was made through the Donovan External Counsel database. He stopped. We've just pulled the full access log. The credentials that were used. Thomas, Adrian said. Quietly. She needs to know, Thomas said. It wasn't a challenge. It was a man who had decided something. Adrian was silent. Thomas looked at Sienna. The credentials used to access the property documentation belong to the Donovan Deal's external counsel. But the specific query, the search terms, the navigation path through the database, match a retrieval pattern that we've seen before. He brought something up on his screen and turned it toward her. It matches the retrieval pattern from your scheduling system, the same system you built. Someone used the logic of your architecture to construct the search. She stared at the screen. Someone who knew the system, she said. Someone who knew it from the inside, Thomas said. The pattern is too specific to be coincidence. This wasn't Varga's people stumbling onto the right query. This was someone who understood how your system was built and used that understanding to construct a targeted search. The number of people who know that system well enough to do that, she said slowly, is very small. Yes, Thomas said. It's me, you, and... She stopped. The room. She became aware of the room around her in a new way. The 3 personnel at the far stations. The topographic display. Thomas, who had decided she needed to know. Adrian, who was standing very still. Who else has access to the system's architecture? She said. She was asking Thomas, but she was looking at Adrian. Adrian looked at her. His expression had the quality of a man standing at the edge of something he had delayed standing at for as long as possible. There was a consultation, he said, 8 months ago. A technical review of the system's security architecture. An external specialist was brought in under an NDA to assess vulnerabilities. The cold moved through her from the inside out. Who? His name is Daniel Marsh. He runs a private security consulting firm. He was brought in through Thomas's recommendation and cleared through 3 layers of vetting. He spent 4 days reviewing the system architecture and filed a report that indicated no critical vulnerabilities. And then, she said, Adrian's jaw moved, and then 6 weeks ago we discovered that Marsh's firm had been acquired, quietly, through a holding structure. He stopped. By a company that has since been identified as a Varga-affiliated entity. The silence in the room had weight to it, physical, almost. He was a plant, she said. Not a question. We believe so. The acquisition predates his engagement with us. We think the vetting was designed to pass our checks. He came in legitimate and left with a complete map of your system's architecture. And you knew this 6 weeks ago, she said. We identified the acquisition 6 weeks ago. The connection to Marsh's prior engagement took 3 more weeks to, but you knew this 3 weeks ago, she said. You knew that someone had your system's architecture, that Varga had a map of the system I built. 3 weeks ago. We were assessing the extent of the exposure. We didn't know what he'd taken specifically, whether it was enough to… Adrian. Her voice had gone to a place she didn't usually let it go. Flat, cold. The kind of flat that comes after the anger has burned so hot, it's simplified into something pure. Did you know 3 weeks ago that the system I built had been compromised? He met her eyes. Yes. And you didn't tell me. No. I have been sitting in that office, in that chair, running that system, for 3 weeks since you found out that someone had a map of it. Running it, using it, operating inside a compromised structure that I built, and you told me nothing. The assessment was that the day-to-day operation presented minimal additional risk if… Stop. She said it like a door closing. Stop managing the language. You made a decision 3 weeks ago that I didn't need to know my own work had been compromised, that I didn't need to know the thing I built every day had a hole in it that Varga's people cut. You decided that for me. Yes, he said. I did. Like you decided I didn't need to know what I was building. That's not the same. It is exactly the same. You have been deciding what I know about my own work and my own safety for 4 years and dressing it up as protection. And it is not protection, Adrian. It is control. It looks like protection, and it functions like control, and I have been too busy being useful to notice the difference. The room was very still. No one at the far stations was pretending to work anymore. Adrian didn't argue. He didn't qualify. He stood with the full weight of what she'd said, and he didn't move away from it. And she had enough clarity, even through the cold fury, to note that a lesser man would have. You're right, he said. I know I am. And I have no defense that isn't an explanation, and I know the difference between those two things, and you deserve better than explanations right now. I need to finish the extraction, she said. Her voice had gone flat with the particular flatness of a person who has located the task because the task is the only thing in the room they trust right now. She turned back to the keyboard. Give me 4 minutes, then give me the key. Nobody spoke. She worked. The retrieval path resolved in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. She sat back and looked at it. The pathway through her own architecture, the route to the 11 encrypted partitions. It was clean. It was correct. It would work. The key, she said. Adrian came to stand beside her. He didn't sit. He looked at the screen for a moment, then he read it aloud. 17 characters, alphanumeric, precise. She entered it as he spoke. Her fingers didn't hesitate. She hit the retrieval command. The system processed for 11 seconds. Then the screen showed 11 files, decrypted, queued for transmission. She looked at them. 14 months of intelligence. Names and numbers and routing structures and documented crimes. Enough to end Lucian Varga's operation permanently if the right people received it. "Send it," Adrian said. She sent it. 4 simultaneous transmissions. The system logged them. Timestamp 4:47 a.m. Recipients confirmed. The screen cleared. Sienna stared at the blank screen for a moment. "It's done," she said. "Yes," Thomas said from the other side of the room. Adrian moved immediately. "North vehicles. Thomas, initiate the call. I want Lucien's line in the next 3 minutes." He was already moving toward the door, and then he stopped, turned, looked at Sienna with something that was not strategy or operation or management. "Can you walk?" "I can always walk," she said. They moved through the estate toward the north exit, Sienna and Adrian and Thomas and 2 of the personnel, and behind them the remaining security team held its positions, and the topographic display tracked its markers, and the mountain outside held its cold dark with total indifference to everything happening inside it. The north vehicles were armored, smaller than the SUVs from Manhattan, built for terrain rather than appearance. Thomas was on his phone, rapid and quiet. One of the personnel had the north door open. Cold air hit her face again. The same pine and granite and elevation. The same insistence that she was still a body in a world that had physical laws. "Before we get in the car," she said. Adrian stopped. "Is there anything else?" she said. "Is there anything else you've decided I don't need to know? Because I need you to understand something right now clearly. If there is something else and I find out about it after we get in that car, there is nothing you can do or say that will—" "Daniel Marsh is not the only person who had access to the system's architecture," he said. She stopped breathing. "There is one other person," he said. "One other person who was given a partial architectural review for the purposes of a contingency plan that I built 18 months ago. A contingency plan that was designed to operate if I was ever incapacitated, and the system needed to be accessed by someone with operational authority who was not me." "Who?" she said. His expression had something in it she had never seen before and would not have had a word for 24 hours ago, but could name now precisely. It was the look of a man who has reached the thing he was most afraid to say. "Victor Hale," he said. The name went through her like cold water. Victor Hale was Adrian's second in command. She had met him twice in 4 years. Brief meetings, formal, the kind where everyone in the room is performing a version of themselves for an audience. A tall man, silver-templed, with the polished manners of someone who had learned them late in life and wore them with the slight self-consciousness of an acquired quality. She had filed his name in her mental architecture under senior internal leadership, limited direct contact, and left it there. "Victor Hale," she said. "Yes." "Who is—" She stopped. He has run my organization's operational logistics for 7 years. He has access to financial structures, personnel records, and strategic planning at a level that only Thomas and I share." Adrian's voice was even, deliberately even, the kind of even that is built out of controlled breathing. "And 18 months ago, I gave him a partial architectural map of your system as part of a contingency protocol." 18 months ago, she said. "And Marsh's engagement was 8 months ago." "Yes." "And the Donovan deal that Marsh accessed through— when did that deal begin?" A pause. 9 months ago." "Victor Hale has been with your organization for 7 years, she said slowly. "He has operational access to everything. You gave him partial architectural access to my system 18 months ago. 8 months ago, a consultant with a partial system map got access to your deal pipeline." She stopped. "Did you vet Victor Hale in the last 18 months? We have ongoing vetting protocols for all senior— Did you personally review his vetting in the last 18 months? The pause was a fraction too long. "No," he said. "Who oversaw his vetting review?" Silence. She looked at him. She watched the answer arrive in his expression before it arrived in words, the same way she'd watched him understand things in meetings. The moment the information aligned and the picture resolved, and you could see the impact of it moving through him. "Thomas," he said quietly, turning his head. Thomas had lowered his phone. He was looking at Adrian with an expression that had shed all its layers. No management, no careful delivery. Just a man with information that was about to change everything. Hale's last full review was 16 months ago, Thomas said. I signed off on it. It came back clean. A beat. The review was conducted by an external security firm. Which firm? Adrian said. His voice had gone somewhere very quiet. Thomas said the name. It was not Daniel Marsh's firm. It was another name. But Adrian's face told her the name meant something, and when he turned to look at her, the calculation was already complete behind his eyes, and it had produced a result that had made the blood drain from his face. Hale recommended the firm, Thomas said. I authorized the engagement. The firm is connected to Varga, Adrian said. Not a question. I don't know yet. I need... find out. Adrian's voice was the quietest she had ever heard it, quieter than the bar, quieter than the corridor last night, the quietness of a man who has just understood the full architecture of what has been done to him. Sienna stood in the cold of the north exit, with the mountain dark above her and the SUV's engine running 6 feet away, and she understood it too. Victor Hale. 7 years inside Adrian's organization. 16 months since his last review. A security firm he'd recommended, connected, perhaps, to Varga. A partial map of Sienna's system, given to him 18 months ago by a man who trusted him. The intelligence archive she'd just transmitted. The one that was supposed to end Lucien Varga permanently. The one that had been accessed and compiled and stored inside a system that Victor Hale had a partial map of. If Hale was Varga's man, if he had been Varga's man for any significant portion of 7 years, then he had not just been feeding operational intelligence outward. He had been inside the architecture, inside the contingency planning, inside the thing Adrian had built most carefully. And then she thought of something that landed in her chest like dropped weight. The file. The intelligence archive. 11 months of compilation stored inside the system she'd built, accessed through a key only Adrian held. But Hale had a partial architectural map, and if Hale had been working with Varga for long enough, and Varga's people had Daniel Marsh's full architectural review from 8 months ago. Adrian, she said. He looked at her. The file we just sent, she said, the intelligence archive. His expression shifted. If Hale has been communicating with Varga's organization, she said, and Varga's people have Marsh's architectural review. She stopped. They knew the retrieval path. They knew what a successful extraction from that system would look like from the outside. They've been monitoring the system. She looked at his face and watched the calculation complete itself in him at the same moment it completed in her. The extraction I just ran. The transmission I just sent. They saw it, he said. Not a question. They saw it, she confirmed. All 11 files, the recipients, the timestamp, everything. They have the same intelligence we just transmitted, Thomas said from behind them. Very quietly. The 4-hour window, the vehicles staged on the access roads. The scouts sent to the east perimeter as a message or a test. None of it was Varga arriving unprepared for a direct confrontation. All of it was Varga arriving to see whether they would run the extraction. Because the extraction itself, the moment they pulled the file and sent it, told Varga everything he needed to know about what Adrian had on him and who had received it. And if Varga's people were monitoring with Marsh's architectural map, they hadn't just seen the transmission. They'd intercepted it. Sienna stood in the cold and felt the shape of it settle into something irreversible. The file was gone. The recipients were real. She believed that. But Varga now knew the file existed, knew its contents in general, knew who had received it, and had 4 hours to reach those recipients before the information became actionable. A federal prosecutor, a journalist, an oversight body, an attorney. 4 people who had just received documentation implicating Lucien Varga in federal crimes. And Varga now knew exactly who they were. He's not coming for you, she said to Adrian, and her voice was very steady in a way that frightened her slightly. He's not here for me. The pressure point, he already used it. He used it to get you to run the extraction. He used me to get you to show him the file. Adrian looked at her. He needed to know what you had, she said. He couldn't find it from the outside. But he knew that if he threatened me, you would... She stopped. Looked at him. You would deploy it. You would run the extraction. You would send it. And in doing so, Adrian said very quietly, I gave him a real-time map of everything I had, every recipient, every detail. And now those 4 people are in danger, she said. Right now, in the next 4 hours. The mountain was silent above them. The vehicles on the access roads were waiting. Inside the estate, 12 personnel held a defensive perimeter against 20 people who might or might not come through it, while the real damage happened in 4 cities to 4 people who had no idea what they'd just received and what receiving it had just made them. Adrian Castellano stood in the cold, in the dark, at the north exit of a property that had been found, with a compromised file and a compromised operative inside his organization, and a woman beside him who had just watched his entire plan collapse into exactly the outcome it was supposed to prevent. And he said nothing for 10 full seconds. Then he turned to Thomas. Get the prosecutor's office on the line. Direct. Not through channels. A pause. And find Hale. Thomas was already moving. Adrian turned to Sienna, and she saw it on his face. Not the controlled operational mask, not the managed distance, not the man who had spent 4 years maintaining 11 minutes of discipline. Just the face underneath all of it. The face of a man who had protected everything carefully and had it taken apart anyway, and who was looking at her because she was the only fixed point left in the room. I need you to tell me, he said quietly, that you still have something left. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, somewhere on the access road, a vehicle engine turned over. The 4 hours, it turned out, had been an optimistic estimate. The vehicle engine on the access road didn't move closer. It just idled, sitting out there in the dark like a held breath, like something that had decided to make its presence known without yet committing to what that presence meant. Sienna heard it clearly in the cold air of the north exit, a low mechanical pulse, patient and deliberate. And she understood it the same way she'd understood everything else in the last 6 hours, as information, as a choice being communicated, as Lucien Varga conducting a conversation without words. He wasn't rushing. That was the point. He had 4 hours and he knew it, and he was letting them know he knew it. Inside, Yeats, Adrian said. They moved back into the estate. The north door closed. The cold stayed outside, but the weight of it came with them. The operations room had changed in the 3 minutes they'd been gone. Thomas had 2 phones active simultaneously, and was speaking into one with the focused velocity of someone delivering information that can't be slowed down. One of the personnel at the far station had a tactical map up that Sienna hadn't seen before. Street level, Manhattan, with 4 marked locations she recognized immediately as the recipients of the transmitted file. The federal prosecutor's office, the publication's address, the oversight body's New York liaison office, the attorney's firm on Park Avenue. 4 locations. 4 people who had received the file in the last 22 minutes and had no idea that receiving it had put them in the same position she was in. She stood in the doorway and looked at the tactical map and felt something cold and specific move through her that was not fear exactly, but lived close to it. The feeling of watching consequences propagate outward from a single point and knowing you were the single point. Adrian moved to Thomas. Prosecutor? Line is active. Thomas handed him a phone. Assistant to the AUSA. I couldn't get direct. Adrian took the phone. This is Adrian Castellano. I need to speak with whoever in that office received an encrypted transmission in the last 30 minutes. Yes. Now. He moved to the far corner of the room, phone pressed to his ear, and Sienna watched his back, the straight line of his shoulders, the particular rigidity that meant he was operating at a level where the body stops expressing what the mind is doing. Thomas came to stand beside her, close enough to speak quietly. Hale, she said before he could. We've located his phone, Thomas said. It's been stationary at a property in Westchester for the last 4 hours. Either he's there or he left the phone there intentionally. The second one, she said. Yes, Thomas agreed. I think so too. How long has he been with Varga? Thomas was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that precedes an answer that's been assembled from inference rather than confirmed data. Based on the timeline of events, the Donovan deal introduction, the Marsh engagement, the property documentation access, my best estimate is between 14 and 18 months. The same window as Varga's case-building operation. The same window. Thomas looked at the tactical map. Which means Hale was either recruited before Varga began or was the catalyst that allowed Varga to begin. Either way, he has been inside Adrian's operational planning for that entire period. Sienna thought about the contingency protocol, the partial architectural map Adrian had given Hale 18 months ago. She thought about what 18 months of that access, filtered through Varga's intelligence apparatus, would have produced. Not just a map of her system, a map of everything. Every decision cycle, every security protocol, every person and pathway and structure that Adrian's organization ran on. He knows where everything is, she said. Yes. Including the secondary locations, the north vehicle route, the alternative perimeters. Thomas looked at her. We've already rerouted the vehicle plan. But the reroute is based on protocols that Hale had access to as well, she said. The pause was half a second. Yes. So we don't know what the reroute is worth. No, Thomas said. We don't. She moved to the central table and looked at the topographic display. 12 personnel markers. The 3 vehicles on the access road now showing a 4th that had appeared at the south junction in the last 7 minutes. The perimeter was being tightened incrementally, deliberately, with the patience of someone who understood that they had time on their side and that their opponent's every response was either known in advance or knowable. She had spent 11 weeks building an elegant system. Varga had spent 14 months building an elegant trap, and the most elegant part of the trap was that the system she'd built, the thing she'd been most proud of, was the mechanism that had sprung it. She was very angry. The anger was clean now, refined down to its essential structure after the complicated layers of the last few hours. It was useful anger. She knew how to use useful anger. I need access to the full system, she said to Thomas. Adrian has not the archive, the scheduling architecture itself. I need full administrative access. Thomas looked at her for a moment. Why? Because Varga's people are using Marsh's architectural map to monitor the system in real time. That means they're reading every operation that runs through it. Communication protocols, personnel movements, vehicle routing. If it touches the scheduling architecture, they see it. She looked at him steadily. Unless I change the architecture. Thomas was quiet. You built it, he said. I built it. I know every load-bearing element in it, and I know which elements can be restructured without breaking the system entirely. If I rebuild the routing logic on 3 key pathways, the external monitor, Varga's access point, wherever it is, will be reading a map that no longer matches the territory. She stopped. It will take 40 minutes. Maybe less. We may not have 40 minutes. I know. She looked at the tactical map. The south vehicle, the east perimeter where Kowalski had gone down, the idle engine on the north access road. So I'd better start. Adrian came back across the room. He lowered the phone and his expression had shifted, not to something better, but to something more decided. The look of a man who has received information he was not glad to receive and has already integrated it and moved forward. The prosecutor's office received the file, he said. The assistant confirmed transmission receipt. The AUSA himself is not in the building at this hour. They're attempting to reach him. He stopped. I couldn't give them more than 30 seconds of context. They're going to treat it as an anonymous submission until morning unless someone escalates. The journalist, Thomas said. Same situation. Overnight skeleton crew. The editor I trust doesn't receive messages through the publication's general line. Adrian looked at the tactical map. The oversight body will have a duty officer. Thomas, already on it. The attorney is the variable. He has standing instructions, and he is personally motivated to act on them. But if Varga's people are moving to those 4 locations, they're not going to those locations, Sienna said. Both men looked at her. Think about the timeline, she said. Varga's people identified this property at 3:12. They've been staged outside for 90 minutes. They saw the extraction in real time, the transmission going out, the recipients confirmed. If they were going to move on those 4 locations, they would have moved the moment the transmission completed. They had a window before any of those offices could act on what they received. She looked at the south vehicle on the display. They didn't move. They're still here. All of them. What does that tell you? Adrian said. It tells me the file isn't the primary objective anymore, she said. Or it never was. She looked at him. The file was leverage, evidence of what you had, a test of how you'd respond to pressure. But Varga is still outside with his people staged at your perimeter at 4:50 in the morning, which means there is something else he wants that the file doesn't give him. The room was quiet for a moment. He wants me, Adrian said, not with fear, with the flat recognition of a man identifying a fact. He wants a conversation, she said. That's what the idle engine is. That's what the East Perimeter Scout was. Not an infiltration, a message. He's been communicating for the last 90 minutes, and we've been reading it as threat preparation when it's actually an invitation. Thomas made a sound that wasn't quite disagreement. An invitation with 20 armed personnel. Because he's Lucien Varga, and that's his preferred way of making invitations. She looked at Adrian. He wants a meeting, direct. He's been trying to set the conditions for it since 3:12. He could have moved on this property 40 minutes ago if all he wanted was a confrontation. Adrian stared at the tactical map for a long moment. His breathing was even. She could see the calculation running, the analysis, the threat assessment, the variable mapping that she suspected ran continuously in him. The way background processes run in a computer, always active, always updating. Sienna, he said. Yes. What you said about restructuring the system architecture, how certain are you that it works? 85%, she said. The remaining 15 is the time variable. If they're actively monitoring and they notice the restructure in progress, they'll know what I'm doing. How long before they'd notice? If they're watching actively, 15 minutes. If it's automated monitoring, 30. He looked at Thomas. What do we have on automated versus active monitoring? Unknown, Thomas said. Estimate. Thomas thought for 2 seconds. Automated. Varga's people are staged outside. They're not sitting in a monitoring facility watching a screen. They sent the alert when the extraction triggered and they confirmed recipient data, but they're not running active surveillance on a system through a mountainside property at this hour. It's automated. 30 minutes, Adrian said. He looked at Sienna. Start now. She was already moving to the station before he finished the sentence. The keyboard felt familiar under her hands. The system opened the way it always did, cleanly, with the particular logic she'd embedded in its structure over 11 weeks. She navigated to the administrative layer, the deep architecture that sat underneath the operational surface, and she began. Behind her, Adrian was speaking to Thomas again, low and rapid. She tuned it to the level of background, present, monitored, not consuming bandwidth she needed. She worked the way she worked best, which was precisely and without pausing to second-guess what she'd decided, because second-guessing in the middle of a structural process was how systems broke. She found the first load-bearing pathway, the one that routed personnel movement communications, and began the restructure. Not a full rebuild, a reroute. Change the logic tree at the point where it branched toward the external-facing node, redirect it through a new internal pathway that the Marsh Architectural Review had never seen because it didn't exist yet. She was building it as she moved. Her hands were steady. She noticed them being steady and found this almost interesting. The rest of her body was not particularly steady. Her heart rate was elevated. There was a tension across her shoulders that had been there since the knock on the east room door. Her mouth was dry. But her hands knew what they were doing, and they did it without asking the rest of her for permission. 8 minutes into the restructure, Adrian crouched beside her. Not to check her work. She knew from 4 years of practice that he didn't second-guess her work once it was in progress. He crouched beside her because he wanted to speak at a level that didn't carry across the room. The meeting, he said quietly. If I request it, if I send a signal that I'm willing to talk, the conditions would be his. She kept working. Yes. His conditions will include a location, a configuration, and probably a restriction on personnel I can bring. Yes. He will also have read the extraction. He knows what's in the file and who has it, which means he knows that the file going public is now my primary leverage and his primary problem, which makes the file the thing he wants to negotiate. He wants me to agree not to push the recipients to act on it or to send a withdrawal communication. Can you do that? Yes, he said. I could send a communication characterizing the transmission as erroneous. It would reduce the urgency. He paused. It would not fully neutralize the risk for him. A federal prosecutor with documentation of financial crimes doesn't simply discard it because the source sends a second message. But it would buy Varga time. 6 to 8 weeks, possibly more. And in 6 to 8 weeks, with Hale's continued access and Marsh's architectural review, he would build something I couldn't counter. He said it without softening. This is a single-point decision. Either I go in and end it tonight, or I manage it for 6 to 8 weeks and lose. She kept her eyes on the screen. Her hands kept moving. End it how? Lucien Varga has an organization of 240 people and a criminal and financial infrastructure that has been building for 11 years. He cannot be ended in the conventional sense. He paused. But he can be ended as a threat to the specific people and operations he has targeted, which requires, at minimum, a negotiated arrangement made with sufficient witnesses and stakes to hold. You're going to negotiate a ceasefire. I'm going to offer him something worth more than whatever he gets from continuing to come at me. He was quiet for a moment, which means I need to know what that is. She stopped typing for 1 second, looked at him. You don't know what you're going to offer him. I know the category, not the specific. He met her eyes. He wants something he can't get by force. If force was sufficient, he would have moved on this property already. There's something he wants from a conversation that he can't take from a confrontation. Information, she said. Possibly. Or a guarantee. Something only you can guarantee. Yes. She went back to the keyboard. Her mind was running 2 parallel tracks simultaneously, the restructure in her hands and the negotiation problem in her head. And she let them run in parallel because that was the only way she knew how to work, and she'd stopped apologizing for it years ago. The Donovan deal, she said. He was still crouched beside her. She felt him go very still. The acquisition is legitimate, she said. The Donovan Group is clean, or clean enough. But the deal structure, the financial routing involved in the acquisition, passes through infrastructure that Varga has visibility into through Hale. She kept typing. If Varga is monitoring that deal, he can see where the capital flows are going. And if he's been monitoring it for 9 months, he knows the destination. She stopped. Does the Donovan acquisition have a downstream component that isn't in the public documentation? A beat. Yes, Adrian said. What is it? Another beat. Longer. A controlling interest in a freight logistics company operating in 3 jurisdictions where Varga has significant distribution infrastructure. She processed that. You're buying into his supply chain. Adjacent to it. Not intentionally. The logistics company was a secondary asset in the acquisition, and its operational geography wasn't... He stopped. I didn't fully analyze the territorial overlap until 4 months ago. And when you analyzed it, I understood that Varga would eventually see it as an encroachment. Did you intend it as one? The pause was the longest yet. No, he said, not initially. But you didn't divest the logistics interest? No. She was quiet for a moment, hands still moving on the keyboard. He thinks you're making a move on his distribution territory, deliberately, through a legitimate acquisition structure that he can't easily counter through his usual methods. She let that sit. That's what this is, the 14 months of case building, the Hale placement, the Marsh engagement. He's been building leverage against a territorial encroachment he believes you engineered. Yes, Adrian said, that's what I now believe. And did you engineer it? The silence was 4 seconds long. Adrian. The logistics interest was not the target of the acquisition, he said carefully. The territorial overlap was identified after the deal was structured. The decision not to divest was made because the logistics operation has significant legitimate value independent of the territorial question. He stopped. All of that is true. And the other thing, she said, the thing that's also true. He didn't answer. You knew it would pressure him, she said. Not an accusation, just the information named. You identified the overlap 4 months ago, and you didn't divest, and you knew that eventually he would see it and feel it as pressure. I considered it, he said, a secondary outcome. A useful secondary outcome. Yes. She finished the second pathway restructure and moved to the third. Her hands hadn't stopped. So you were applying pressure to his territory through a legitimate business instrument, and he read it as a territorial move, and he began building a case against you. And in the process of building that case, he found me and used me to get you to reveal the intelligence archive, which revealed his exposure, which is now the only card you have to bring to a negotiation that you created the conditions for in the first place. That's accurate, he said. I need you to understand, she said, still typing, that when this is over, I'm going to have a great deal to say about the experience of being a secondary outcome in someone else's strategic calculation. I know, he said. I am not done being angry. I know that too. She finished the third pathway, checked the architecture. The restructure was holding. The 3 rerouted pathways now ran through internal nodes that had no external-facing access points, which meant Varga's monitoring software was reading a structure that had quietly stopped matching the territory it was supposed to map. It would take the automated system time to detect the discrepancy. Not long, but some. Done, she said. Adrian stood. Thomas. He crossed the room. Signal the North Access Road vehicle. 1 flash on the exterior lights. Standard protocol for requesting parley. Thomas looked at him for a half-second that contained an entire argument. Then he went to the panel beside the door and did it. 1 flash. Exterior north lights. Short, controlled. The room waited. 40 seconds passed. Then from the speaker on the central table, one of the exterior personnel said, North vehicle is moving, coming up the access road. Slow. Thomas looked at Adrian. 1 vehicle or all of them? 1, the speaker said. The others are stationary. He accepts the parley, Thomas said. Of course he does, Adrian said. This is what he's been waiting for. He straightened his jacket. An automatic gesture, professional reflex, the kind of thing the body does when it has been trained to certain standards, and those standards assert themselves regardless of context. He looked, in that moment, like the man Sienna had walked into a building with 4 years ago for an interview that she'd believed was for a legitimate corporate executive assistant position. Composed, contained, a man whose surface gave nothing away. She knew now what the surface was containing. I'm coming with you, she said. No. Adrian, the parley is between Varga and me, bringing you to the meeting. I'm not an asset to be protected during the negotiation, she said. I'm the reason for the negotiation. He found me. He used me. He's been tracking a system I built for 6 months through a map he got from a consultant you brought into my architecture. She held his gaze. If you're going to end this tonight, I need to be in that room. Sienna, he needs to see that I know what I built, she said. He needs to understand that I understand the full scope of the systems I've been operating inside. That's what makes me a credible part of any agreement you negotiate. Not just a variable that needs protecting, but a person who has full operational knowledge and has made a choice about what to do with it. She stopped. You need me there. Not as a hostage and not as leverage, as someone who made the thing he's afraid of. The room was quiet. Thomas said nothing. He had the expression of a man who had decided this was not his argument to enter. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. The exterior north lights reflected through the far window, distant and cold, and somewhere on the access road a single vehicle was climbing toward them, with Lucien Varga or his representative or both. And the 12 personnel on the perimeter held their positions, and the mountain held its cold, and in the operations room at the center of all of it, a man who had spent 4 years deciding what Sienna Vale needed to know was looking at her, and, for once, not deciding. Stay 1 step behind me, he said. Don't speak first. Don't react to anything he says before I do. Understood. If he makes an approach toward you, he won't, she said. I'm not a threat to him, and he knows it. I'm information. He'll treat me as information. Adrian held her gaze for 1 more second. Yes, he said. He will. The forecourt was cold and fully lit when the vehicle arrived. Adrian had instructed the exterior lighting to full operational level, not an aggressive gesture, a transparent one. This is what we have. This is where we stand. Varga would read it correctly. He read everything correctly, which was the quality that made him dangerous, and, in this specific circumstance, the quality that might make a negotiation possible. The vehicle that stopped in the forecourt was a black sedan, Understated, no visible security modifications, which was itself a kind of statement. The driver remained inside. The rear door opened and a man got out. Sienna had never seen Lucien Varga in person. She had heard his name in corridor fragments, understood his organizational weight from context, assigned him a face in her imagination that was probably wrong. The reality was a man in his late 50s, medium height, wearing a dark overcoat over a suit that was not as expensive as Adrian's but was worn with more comfort, as if he'd stopped performing for his clothes some years back and they had adjusted accordingly. His hair was gray and close-cropped. His face had deep lines and the particular stillness of someone who had learned, probably through direct experience, that movement costs more than stillness. He looked at Adrian first, then at Sienna. His gaze moved over her with the systematic quality of assessment, not hostile, not dismissive, simply comprehensive, the way you look at a document you've heard about and are now reading for the first time. "Castellano," he said. His voice was lower than she'd imagined and had an accent she couldn't immediately place. Eastern European origin, significantly smoothed by decades of somewhere else. "Varga," Adrian said. "I wasn't expecting—" Varga looked at Sienna again. A fraction of a pause. "Her. She wanted to be here," Adrian said. Varga's expression moved in a way that might have been appreciation and might have been something more calculated. "Smart," he said, not to Adrian, to Sienna directly. She didn't respond. She'd agreed to the terms. "Inside," Adrian said. "I'd prefer out here," Varga said. "I spent 7 weeks in a room with no windows in 2009, and I find I am not fond of rooms at present." Adrian looked at him for a moment. Then, with the specific deliberateness of a man making a small concession to set a tone, "Fine." They stood in the forecourt, the three of them, in the cold and the full light, with the mountain above them and the security perimeters holding their careful distances, and the sedan in the forecourt and its driver who had not moved. "The file," Varga said. "Your transmission." "Goes public if anything happens to me, her, or the 4 recipients," Adrian said. "You know that already?" "Yes." Varga put his hands in his overcoat pockets. "I've read it. The architecture of what you've collected is impressive. 11 months. He said the number without inflection, but the number carried weight. "You spent 11 months preparing that." "I spent 11 months ensuring I had a reason not to use it," Adrian said. "There's a difference." Varga looked at him. "Victor Hale," he said. "Yes." "He came to us," Varga said. "I want you to understand that. I did not recruit him. He identified himself as someone with access to your operation and a willingness to share that access in exchange for specific considerations." He paused. "I accepted his offer. That is my responsibility, and I don't minimize it. But his choice was his own." "What considerations?" Adrian said. "Financial, and a guarantee of position in a restructured organization." Varga's mouth moved slightly. "He believed your organization was declining, that I was the ascending force, and that positioning himself with me was the correct long-term calculation." He stopped. "His calculation was not without logic given the information available to him." "And now," Adrian said. "And now," Varga said, "the information available to him has changed." Sienna was watching Varga's face while he spoke. She was doing the thing she'd developed over 4 years of watching Adrian in negotiations, tracking not the words, but the architecture underneath the words, the decisions being made in real time about what to reveal and what to hold. Varga was a man who had built something large and had spent 11 years protecting it, and he was standing in a cold forecourt at 5 in the morning because something had shifted in his calculation, and he had chosen negotiation over the alternative. She thought about what Adrian had said. He wants something he can't get by force. She looked at Varga, and she understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has spent 4 years watching powerful men communicate in the space between their words, what that something was. "The logistics company," she said. Both men looked at her. She had broken the terms. She didn't care. "The freight logistics interest in the Donovan acquisition," she said, directly to Varga. "That's what this has been about. You read the acquisition as a territorial move. You responded with a 14-month intelligence operation because the legitimate structure of the deal left you no conventional recourse. She kept her eyes on him. But the interest was not a deliberate move. The territorial overlap was identified after the deal was structured. Varga looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Adrian. She knows the full operational scope of your business. She knows the full operational scope of everything, Adrian said. And she is here because she chose to be, Adrian said. Not because I needed her here. Because she understood the situation better than most of the people I pay to understand situations, and she decided her presence was relevant. Varga was quiet for a moment. He looked at Sienna with an expression that was recalibrating. Not the initial assessment look, something more active. The look of a man encountering a variable he had not fully accounted for. The logistics interest, he said finally, to Sienna. You said it was not a deliberate move. I said the overlap was identified after the deal was structured, she said. Those are different things. The interest itself was retained after the overlap was identified. That was a decision. Varga almost smiled. It was a small movement, the kind that costs nothing and gives nothing, the professional equivalent of a nod. Precise. I try to be. He looked at Adrian. The interest, he said. What would it take? A divestment, Adrian said. 6 months. Fair market value. Independent assessment. Structured transfer to a buyer who is not yours and not mine. And in exchange, your organization withdraws from any action against mine. Hale is handled internally. I don't want him, and I don't want the exposure of any formal proceeding. Adrian paused. And the file stays where it is. The file is already with 4 recipients, Varga said. The file is with 4 recipients who received an unsolicited encrypted transmission at 4:30 in the morning and have no immediate context for it, Adrian said. A follow-up communication characterizing the transmission as a security test, sent from the same source, verifiable, reduces the urgency significantly. Significantly, Varga repeated. Not completely. Not completely, Adrian agreed, which is the point. The file exists, the recipients exist. That doesn't change regardless of what we agree to here. You continue to have exposure, I continue to have leverage. The question is whether that state of affairs is acceptable to both of us as a long-term equilibrium. Varga looked at the mountain. The sky above it was beginning to differentiate. Not light yet, but the absence of full dark, the color of something that hadn't decided what it was going to be. Victor Hale believed you were declining, he said, not quite changing the subject. I believed him because the evidence suggested it. The Donovan acquisition looked expensive and overextended. The logistics overlap looked like a mistake. He paused. But a man who has spent 11 months building an intelligence archive of the quality I read tonight is not declining. He is waiting. Yes, Adrian said, waiting for exactly this conversation. Yes, Varga nodded, once, slowly, with the weight of a man who has run the calculation and found the number he was looking for. The divestment, 6 months, independent assessment. He paused. I want approval rights on the buyer. No, Adrian said. Independent means independent. I'll agree to a list of excluded buyers, not yours and not mine, as I said, and a joint appointment of the assessing firm. Varga was quiet for 4 seconds. The kind of quiet that in a negotiation means the number is close enough to work with and the remaining question is whether to push. He didn't push. The personnel on your perimeter, he said. There's a man at the east wall who encountered one of mine. He's alive, Thomas said from the doorway, where he'd been standing in silence for the last 4 minutes. Varga turned to look at Thomas. Good. I want him to remain that way. My man is not authorized for a small stop. More than that. Then we have the same interest in the next 5 minutes, Thomas said. Varga turned back to Adrian. The agreement, he said. I'll need it documented. Not publicly, but documented. Thomas will draft it, Adrian said. Tonight. You'll have a copy before your vehicles leave this property. And Hale. Hale is mine, Adrian said. There was no temperature in those 3 words. No heat, no cold, just the finality of a door closing. He made his calculation. He'll live with the consequences of it. You don't need to concern yourself with how. Varga looked at him for a moment. You've never made an example of anyone. No, Adrian said. I haven't. He met Varga's eyes. But I have ensured consistently that the people who work for me understand that the cost of miscalculation is not recovered. Hale will understand that, thoroughly. Sienna stood one step behind Adrian and watched Lucien Varga look at the man she'd worked for 4 years and reach whatever conclusion he reached, and then Varga looked at her, directly, for the third time. And this time the look was different from either of the first two. Not assessment, not recalibration. Something she could only describe as acknowledgement. You built the system he used to store the file that is currently sitting in 4 inboxes, Varga said to her. Yes, she said. And you restructured it tonight. In the last, he glanced at his watch, 40 minutes. So that whatever my monitoring was reading no longer matches what's actually there. She didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. You are very good at what you do, he said. I know, she said. Something moved in his expression, the almost smile again. And what are you going to do next? It was a genuine question. She could hear the genuine in it, underneath the strategic surface, the way she'd learned to hear the real thing underneath the performed thing in 4 years of working for a man who had spent a long time keeping them separate. She looked at Lucien Varga, who had spent 14 months building leverage against a territorial pressure that had started as a mistake and become a choice, who had sent a scout to an east perimeter and an idling engine to a north access road, and a text message that said, "We already know," and had climbed a mountain at 5 a.m. to stand in cold light and negotiate instead of escalate. She thought about what she was going to do next. She thought about the system she'd built and what it had been used for and what she now understood about the distance between the work you do and what the work becomes. She thought about 4 years. She thought about 11 minutes. She was about to answer when the radio on Thomas's belt produced a sound. Short, sharp, a single burst of static. And Thomas's hand went to it immediately, and the one word that came through the static was enough to change the shape of every person in the forecourt. The word was Hale. And the voice that said it had the specific compression of someone reporting from a position that has just become dangerous. Thomas, Adrian said, not looking away from Varga. Report. Thomas pressed the radio. Say again. The static returned. Then the voice, one of the perimeter personnel, southeast position, came through with 6 words that hit the cold forecourt air like something physical. Hale is on the property, armed. Sienna felt Adrian go still beside her with a completeness that was different from any stillness she had seen in him before. Not the stillness of control. The stillness of a man who has just understood that the negotiation he was in the middle of was never the real problem. And the real problem had just walked through a perimeter that Hale himself had mapped and was somewhere in the dark of a mountain property moving toward a specific target. Varga turned. His face had shed every layer of negotiator and was showing something underneath that was genuine and unguarded. That is not mine, he said, quietly, with the particular emphasis of a man making a distinction that matters. I know, Adrian said. He looked at Thomas. Where? Southeast, moving north. Thomas was already on the radio. He's heading for the exterior lights went out. All of them. The full operational lighting that Adrian had instructed to transparency, to this is what we have, gone, instantly, leaving the forecourt lit only by the pale beginning of a sky that hadn't decided yet what it was going to be, and the sedan's headlights cutting white rectangles across the stone. In the sudden dark, Sienna heard Adrian's voice, very close to her, and it had none of the controlled evenness of everything that had come before it. Get down, he said, and his hand was on her arm, pulling, and the first shot cracked through the mountain air from somewhere southeast and took out the sedan's right headlight, and the forecourt went half dark. And somewhere in the remaining darkness, Victor Hale was moving with a map of this property in his head and a gun in his hand, and 7 years of accumulated grievance driving him toward a conclusion that no negotiation on a cold forecourt had ever been going to prevent. The dark lasted 4 seconds. Then the backup lighting system activated. Amber, lower than the operational lights, enough to see by but not enough to see clearly. And in those 4 seconds, Sienna had already moved because Adrian's hand had moved her, and she was behind the front of the sedan with the stone forecourt against her back and the cold of it going through the borrowed gray clothes and her heart doing something it had not done before, which was beat so loudly she could hear it. Adrian was beside her, not crouched, on one knee, watching the southeast perimeter over the sedan's hood with the focused stillness of a man who has been in situations that involved gunfire before and has a specific relationship with that fact. His phone was in his hand. He was already texting. Varga was on the other side of the sedan. He had moved with a speed that surprised her. A man in his late 50s who had spent 11 years building an organization large enough that direct physical threat should theoretically have become someone else's problem, and who had apparently never fully trusted that. He had a phone out too, speaking into it in a language she didn't recognize, rapid and flat. His people, Adrian said quietly. Not a question. Staying on the perimeter, Varga said. I am not interested in escalating a situation I did not create. Hele created it. Yes. Varga's voice had a quality she hadn't heard in the forecourt negotiation, something stripped of the professional surface. Victor Hale is operating outside any agreement or instruction. What he is doing now is his own. Another shot, this one closer, from the sound of it, somewhere inside the property's north tree line, which meant Hale had moved faster than the perimeter report had suggested or had come in from a different approach than southeast. The shot hit something metal, a sound like a bell struck wrong, and then there was silence again, the specific silence that follows a shot on open terrain where everything that was moving has decided to stop. Thomas's voice came through the radio. Southeast and north confirmed. He's flanking. One shooter, moving in a pattern that suggests he knows the rotation. He designed the rotation, Adrian said. Yes. Sienna pressed her back against the stone and looked at the amber-lit forecourt and tried to build a spatial map from sound and the partial information she had. Hale had a map of this property. Hale had 7 years of organizational access, including, presumably, whatever security protocols Thomas had ever written down or discussed through channels Hale had visibility into. Hale was a man who had made a calculation and watched it fail in real time, and had arrived at the conclusion that the only remaining option was the kind of conclusion you couldn't walk back from. She understood, with a cold clarity she hadn't known she was capable of, that Hale was not here for the negotiation. He was not here to stop it, or to leverage it, or to create a new condition. He was here because a man who has bet everything on a side that has just lost doesn't have negotiating position. He has only the thing he's holding. He's going to try for Adrian, she said. Varga looked at her across the front of the sedan. Yes, he said, not me. You are relevant, Varga said. The word was precise and uncomfortable and honest. But you are not the source of his grievance. His grievance is 7 years of service to a man who, in his reading, never adequately recognized it. The logistics interest, the Donovan deal. He told us Adrian was attempting to build something that would eventually absorb or eliminate the operational infrastructure Hale had spent 7 years constructing. That Adrian's long game was consolidation. That there would eventually be no place for him in what Adrian was building. He paused. Whether that is true I cannot say, but that is what Hale believes. Sienna looked at Adrian. In the amber light, his face was not performing anything. He was looking at the north tree line, and his expression had the quality of a man accounting for something. Is it true? She said. He looked at her. Not in the way he believes it. But the organization is changing, has been changing for 3 years. The legitimate structures are being built to eventually carry the full operational weight. That process requires consolidation, yes. Reduction of certain infrastructure. He stopped. People like Hale, the people whose roles were built for the operational architecture of 10 years ago, would need to transition or leave. He found out. He would have found out eventually. I hadn't told him yet because the timeline was... He stopped himself. Looked at the tree line again. Because I kept making the decision to do it later. Because telling him later was more convenient than telling him now. Yes, he said. That's accurate. She filed that. She filed all of it. There was a body of accounting that needed to happen between them, and it was not going to happen in an amber-lit forecourt with a man in the north tree line and a Varga operative on the other side of the sedan, but she was keeping a precise record of everything that needed to be in it. Thomas's radio crackled. "He's at the northeast corner, coming along the wall." Adrian was on his feet before the report finished. "Northeast corner to the main entrance is 30 seconds at a run. Thomas, I need Reyes and Callahan at the main entrance now." "Already moving," Thomas said. "Varga." Adrian looked across the sedan. "I need your people to hold the south perimeter. Nothing moves south for the next 10 minutes. Varga looked at him for a moment. The assessment in it was quick and complete. 10 minutes, he said, and spoke into his phone. Adrian looked at Sienna. "You stay here, behind the sedan. You do not move toward the building. You do not move toward the tree line. You do not— Adrian!" She said it the way she'd said it in the bar, in the corridor, in the operations room. The way that meant I'm a person, not a logistics problem. "Go." He held her gaze for 1 second that was longer than 1 second. Then he moved. He went along the front of the building, staying close to the stone wall, moving with the specific economy of someone who had done this before, in the way that you either have or you haven't. Thomas fell into position behind him from the main entrance doorway. He'd come outside during the radio exchange without Sienna noticing, which was either impressive or a measure of how fractured her attention had been. Sienna stayed behind the sedan for approximately 45 seconds. Then she thought about what she knew and what she could do with what she knew, and she made a decision that she was aware was contrary to specific instructions and did not care. And she moved, not toward the building, not toward the tree line, toward the operations room window. Ground level, amber lit, visible from the east side of the forecourt. She moved low and fast and got to the window and looked in. The operations room was still running. 2 of the personnel had remained at their stations, either by instruction or by the specific professionalism of people who understand that a crisis in one part of the building doesn't stop being tracked in another. The topographic display was still active, and she could see it through the glass clearly enough. She could see Hale's position. One of the personnel markers on the display was moving in a way that was different from the others, faster, with a directness that the rotation patterns didn't have. It had a different color designation than the authorized personnel markers. He was inside the main entrance. He was already inside. She pressed her palm against the window glass, and the personnel inside didn't see her. Their backs were to the window, and she did the fastest calculation of her life, which was, if Hale was already inside and Adrian and Thomas were moving toward the main entrance from outside, they were going to meet him in the entry corridor, and they would not know he was already past the point they were moving toward. She had no radio. Her phone was dead. The window was, she checked, latched from inside. She moved to the north door, which was the door she'd come out of with Adrian 40 minutes ago, and she tried it, and it was unlocked because in the 4-hour scramble of the last hour and a half, the north door had been used as a primary egress, and nobody had thrown the secondary bolt. She went inside. The estate was amber lit throughout. The backup system was building wide, and she knew the layout now from one night's navigation and one morning's urgency, which was not enough and was all she had. She moved through the north corridor toward the operations room because the operations room had radio equipment, and she needed radio equipment, and that was the decision. She was 12 feet from the operations room door when she heard it. Footsteps. Not from the main entrance corridor. From the side passage that connected the main building to the east wing, a route she'd seen on the topographic display but never walked herself. The footsteps were not hurrying. They were deliberate. The footsteps of someone who knew exactly where they were going. She stopped. She pressed herself against the wall of the north corridor, and she breathed as shallowly as she could manage, and she thought very clearly and rapidly about the geometry of her situation. The operations room was 12 feet ahead. The footsteps were behind and to her right from the east wing passage, coming toward the intersection that would bring whoever was walking into this corridor in approximately 7 seconds. She counted. At 4 seconds she moved, forward, fast, covering the 12 feet to the operations room door, pushing through it. The 2 personnel turned from their stations and looked at her with expressions that shifted from alarm to recognition in the time it took her to close the door and get to the nearest radio panel. Hale is in the East Wing Passage, she said. Coming into the North Corridor. I need Thomas on this channel right now. The nearer of the two personnel, a woman in her 30s with a close-cropped haircut and the specific composure of someone whose job involved composure, was already on the radio. Thomas. North Corridor. Subject is inside. East Wing approach. Static. 3 seconds. Then Thomas's voice, slightly compressed, from somewhere that had the acoustic quality of an exterior stone wall. Copy. Where is she? Operations room, the woman said. Lock the door, Thomas said. Do not open it until you hear my voice directly, not over radio, direct. The woman looked at Sienna. Sienna looked at the door she'd just come through. There was no lock on it. It was a push-handle door, no mechanism, the kind of interior door in a building that wasn't designed to be locked from the inside because it was supposed to be defended from the outside. There's no lock, Sienna said. The woman processed this in approximately 1 second, and then she stood up from her station and put her back against the door. Not elegant, entirely practical. Thank you, Sienna said. Don't thank me yet, the woman said. Sienna turned to the second personnel. A man, younger, who had been watching this exchange with the controlled expression of someone in a high-stakes situation who is determined that his most useful contribution is to keep running the systems he was running. The topographic display. Where is Hale now? The man looked at his screen. He stopped. A beat. North Corridor, he stopped. She looked at the door. The woman against it was 5'6" and fit, and probably well-trained, and was still a person holding a door against someone who had already fired twice tonight. He knows this room is here, Sienna said. Not to either of them specifically, just the information, named. He has the property layout. He knows this is the operations center. Yes, the younger man said. He does. Outside the door, through the stone wall, there was no sound. Nothing. The amber light hummed its quiet hum, and the topographic display updated in its measured intervals, and somewhere on the forecourt, Lucien Vargo was on his phone maintaining a south perimeter, and outside the east wall. Kowalski was alive. And somewhere in the building, Adrian and Thomas were moving toward a point that Hale had already passed. She picked up the radio handset, found the channel Thomas had been using. Thomas. She said it quietly and clearly. He stopped outside the operations room. North Corridor. He knows where we are. The response took 4 seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than she wanted. Copy, Thomas said. Hold position. For how long? Hold position, Sienna. She set the handset down. She looked at the door. She looked at the topographic display. She looked at the woman standing against the door with her feet planted and her jaw set and her hands at her sides in the position of someone who had decided this was where they were standing and that was complete. Then the display marker moved. He's moving, the younger man said, away from the door, west, toward... He stopped. Main entrance corridor. Adrian. The main entrance corridor was where Adrian had been moving. Thomas. She had the handset again. He's heading for the main entrance corridor. He's heading for Adrian. The response this time was immediate. Moving. She heard it then, through the stone, muffled but unmistakable. Not a shot. Something else. The sound of a collision that was physical and close and had the weight of 2 large men in a confined space behind it. Then something that was a raised voice, short and cut off. Then silence. She was at the door before she'd decided to move. The woman against it stepped aside, also before she'd decided to, which Sienna appreciated in a way she didn't have words for. And Sienna went through it and into the north corridor and turned west toward the main entrance corridor and moved. The main entrance corridor was 30 feet of stone flooring with overhead lighting that, in the backup system, gave it the quality of a place that has been found rather than built. And at the far end of it, at the point where it opened into the main entrance hall, 3 men were arranged in a geometry that she processed instantly and completely. Hale was in the center of the corridor, facing toward her but not looking at her, looking at the man in front of him, which was Adrian, who had come from the main entrance and was now between Hale and the door. Thomas was behind Hale, which meant Hale was bracketed, which should have resolved the situation, except that Hale had the gun at his side in a way that was not surrender and not active threat, but was very specifically the position of a man who has not decided yet. Adrian was looking at Hale with an expression Sienna had never seen on him before. Not the cold calculation of threat assessment, not the managed distance of professional control. Something older and more complicated. The expression of a man looking at someone he had known for 7 years and finding in that face the specific damage of a thing that had gone wrong slowly enough that neither of them had seen it happening. "Victor," Adrian said. His voice was quiet. No operational control in it. Just his voice. Hale looked at him. He was breathing hard. A man who had moved through a mountain property in cold air, who had fired twice, who had been running a plan that had just collided with a reality that didn't match his map. He was in his 50s, silver-templed, and in the amber light of the corridor he looked less like the man Sienna had met twice in formal meetings, and more like what he actually was, which was someone who had spent 7 years being essential to something and had watched that essentialness begin to expire. "You were going to cut the operations," Hale said. "Not an accusation, a statement, the kind that has been held for a long time and has calcified." "Not cut," Adrian said. "Transition. For you there's a difference. There's always a difference between those two things. Not for me." Hale's breathing was audible. "Not for the people who built what you're planning to replace." He looked at Adrian with something that was not hatred. She had expected hatred, and this was not it. It was something more worn than hatred. 7 years. I built the operational logistics of this organization from a regional operation into what it is. I hired the people. I structured the routes. I designed the protocols that Thomas uses, that everyone uses, and you were going to transition me out like an outdated system. "I was going to offer you a role in the legitimate structure," Adrian said. "You were going to offer me a desk," Hale said. "Managing compliance documentation for a holding company. I've seen the org chart. Thomas showed me the transition framework 6 months ago without realizing I'd understand what I was looking at." Adrian's jaw moved, the small horizontal tightening she knew. "I should have talked to you," he said. Hale looked at him. The gun was still at his side. Thomas was still behind him. The corridor held all of it, amber and close. "Yes," Hale said. "You should have." "I didn't because I kept deciding to do it later. That's the truth." Adrian said it without qualification. The way he'd said "I know" to her in the forecourt, not strategy, just the fact, delivered plainly. "I made the same mistake with you that I've made with the people I value most, which is to believe that the work of protecting something is a substitute for the work of being honest about it. It isn't." Hale looked at him for a long moment. The gun moved. Not raised. The opposite. His hand opened and the gun tilted away from his palm, and Thomas stepped forward and took it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been waiting for that exact movement, and then it was done. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a moment of visible resolution. Just a man whose hand opened and a gun that changed hands, and the specific exhaustion of someone who has reached the end of a decision that was wrong from the beginning and has finally stopped carrying it. Hale put his back against the corridor wall and slid down it until he was sitting on the stone floor. He put his hands on his knees and looked at them and did not say anything else. Thomas secured the weapon and looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at Hale on the floor. He crouched down, eye level. "The way you talk to someone who is done standing." "You fired twice," he said. "Warning shots," Hale said. To the floor. I wasn't going to." He stopped. "I don't know what I was going to do. I had a plan, and then I was here and the plan stopped making sense." "Plans generally do," Adrian said, "when you're inside them." Hale looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed in the amber light. Not from crying, from the cold and the exertion, and the specific rawness of a man who has been holding something for 14 months and has just put it down. "Varga." "He's outside. We were in the middle of an agreement when you arrived. He didn't send me. I want you to understand that." "I know. He told me." "I came because—" Hale stopped, started again. "I came because I couldn't let you make an agreement that kept you standing and me—" He stopped again. "I told myself it was tactical. It wasn't tactical." "No," Adrian said. "It wasn't." Sienna stood at the end of the corridor and watched Adrian crouch in front of Victor Hale on the stone floor. and she watched Hale on the floor, and she thought about 7 years in a desk in a compliance department and the specific cruelty of being made to feel like a system being deprecated rather than a person being managed out. And she thought about 4 years in systems built without knowing what they were for, and she thought that the things Adrian did out of strategic avoidance, the later decisions, the withheld conversations, the choices to protect by controlling instead of trust by communicating, had a body count that wasn't made of the dead. It was made of the people still standing who were shaped wrong by the experience of being protected by someone who didn't know how to do it without owning the thing he was protecting. She thought about herself. She thought about green dresses and first dates and evenings that had been supposed to prove something about independence and instead had proven something else entirely. She thought about 11 minutes. Adrian stood. He looked at Thomas. Get him inside. Get medical to look at him. A pause. And then get him a car home. His own home. Not a holding location. Thomas looked at him. Adrian? He fired 2 warning shots on a mountain property at 5 in the morning after a breakdown of professional trust that I contributed to. The exposure is mutual and the consequence is concluded. He looked at Hale on the floor. You're done, Victor. With my organization and with Varga's. That's the complete outcome. You go home and you build something else. He paused. I'll provide a transition arrangement. Financial? 6 months. Hale looked at him from the floor with an expression that was too complicated to name. Why? He said. Because you built something that mattered for 7 years, Adrian said, and because I should have said that to you 2 years ago, and I didn't. The 6 months is what the conversation should have cost me and didn't. Hale looked at the floor again. Thomas helped him up. They moved toward the main entrance, and Sienna stepped aside to let them pass, and Hale looked at her once as he went by. A brief sideways look that had something in it that she read as shame, and something underneath the shame that was almost relief. The relief of a man who has been carrying a weight he built himself and has finally been permitted to set it down. Then they were gone and the corridor was empty except for her and Adrian. He turned and looked at her. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her across the main entrance corridor from the moment she arrived. Not with the threat assessment scan, not with the operational inventory, but with the specific attention of a man for whom the sight of her standing in a corridor she'd been told not to enter was simultaneously the most frustrating and the most necessary thing in the room. I told you to stay behind the sedan, he said. You did, she agreed. You went through the north door. The topographic display showed he was already past the point you were moving toward. I needed a radio. Thomas had a radio. Thomas was outside. He looked at her for a moment longer. You ran a retrieval protocol on the estate's operations room to locate a radio. I ran a retrieval protocol on the estate's operations room to save your life, she said. The radio was the instrument. He was quiet. Thank you, he said, simply, without apparatus. She nodded once. You're welcome. Outside, the sky through the main entrance window had made its decision. It was pale and specific, the pale of earliest morning, before color has fully committed, but after dark has fully withdrawn. The mountain was visible in it, its tree line sharp against the graduated gray. Somewhere beyond the forecourt, Varga's vehicles would still be holding the south perimeter, because Varga had said 10 minutes, and Varga appeared to be a man who kept the terms of things even when the situation that generated the terms had changed shape. The agreement, Sienna said. I need to get back to the forecourt. I know, before you do... She stopped, looked at the window in the pale morning. When this is over. When you've finished with Varga and Thomas has drafted the documentation and the morning has sorted itself into whatever it becomes, I need you to hear something. He waited. The quality of his waiting had changed from any waiting she'd experienced from him before. It was not the waiting of a man managing a conversation. It was the waiting of a man who has decided to stop managing. I'm going to continue to be angry about things, she said. The systems. The surveillance architecture that was protection. The Marsh engagement that you knew about for 3 weeks. The fact that I built something for 4 years without understanding what I was building. She met his eyes. I'm not going to perform being past it because it's inconvenient or because it disrupts things. You're going to have to live with me being angry about those things for as long as I'm angry about them. Yes, he said. And in exchange for that, she said, I need you to understand something about what I'm offering. I'm not. She stopped, looked for the precise language. Precision was a habit she had, and she wasn't going to break it now. I'm not going to pretend that tonight didn't change the accounting. I know what you did before you came into that bar. I know what 11 minutes cost and what it was. I know the difference between the protection and the control, and I know they were both real, and I know which one I can work with and which one I can't accept. She stopped again. What I need from you, going forward, is the honesty, not the protection, the honesty. He looked at her. The pale morning was behind him in the window, and the amber backup lights were still running, and the corridor was stone and cold and entirely unglamorous, and none of it mattered. You'll have it, he said, both. But the honesty is not conditional. No, she said, it isn't. She moved past him toward the main entrance. He fell into step beside her, and the closeness of it, the natural, uncalculated proximity of two people walking the same direction, was different from 4 years of professional adjacency in a way that she didn't have language for yet, but recognized as significant. Outside, Varga was where they'd left him, on the forecourt beside his sedan with one working headlight, his phone in his hand and his overcoat buttoned against the morning cold. He looked at them as they came through the main entrance, at Adrian first, at the absence of crisis in his posture, and then at Sienna at his side and the specific quality of the side she was occupying, and something in his expression settled. Your man, Adrian said. Hale. Is he alive? Going home? Adrian looked at Varga steadily. As I told you, what happens to him is concluded. Varga nodded. Once. The agreement, he said. Thomas will have it ready in 30 minutes. You can wait inside if you prefer. Margaret will. I prefer the air, Varga said. He looked at the mountain, the tree line, the pale morning working its way down toward the estate. I find I have a tolerance for cold that I did not have in 2009. Thomas appeared in the main entrance behind them. Draft is started. 40 minutes. I have time, Varga said. There was a pause in the forecourt that was not uncomfortable. The specific pause of people who have been through something together that was not of their choosing and have arrived by various routes at a point past it. Varga looked at the mountain. Adrian looked at the property's damaged exterior light. Sienna looked at both of them and thought about the particular absurdity of standing on a mountain forecourt at 6 in the morning, having navigated from a blind date to a ceasefire negotiation in the space of one night. The woman, Varga said, to Adrian, but with his eyes still on the mountain. Your assistant. Yes, Adrian said. She is not your assistant. Adrian was quiet for a moment. No, he said. She's not. Varga looked at Sienna then, the recalibrating look again, the one she'd first seen when she'd spoken about the logistics interest. What are you going to do with the systems you built, he said. Not aggressively, genuinely. Rebuild them, she said, with full knowledge of what they are, or dismantle the parts that shouldn't exist. She held his gaze. That's the project now, deciding which is which. Varga considered this. You would need people you trust to do that properly. Yes. In my experience, he said carefully, the people you trust at the beginning of a project like that are not always the people who deserve to be trusted by the end of it. The process reveals things. I know, she said. That's why it has to be done. He looked at her for another moment, then looked at Adrian with the expression of a man who has arrived at a conclusion and has decided to share it as a courtesy rather than a bargaining chip. She is going to be very difficult to work with, he said. Yes, Adrian said. She always has been. Something in Varga's face finally did what it had been almost doing throughout the night. It became a genuine expression. Not the almost smile of a negotiator granting a small acknowledgement. Something actual and tired, and briefly, unexpectedly human. Good, he said. Hold on to that. 43 minutes later, Thomas produced the agreement documentation, 2 copies, simple language, the specificity of men who understood that clarity in written agreements was not a courtesy but a survival mechanism. Varga read it with the focused attention of someone who had read a great many agreements and had learned to locate the imprecision in them. He found none, which Sienna attributed to Thomas's particular talent for precise language that she had appreciated for 4 years without knowing, until this night, what it was actually in service of. They signed. Both of them. Thomas witnessed. Sienna witnessed, because she was there and because she had earned the right to be part of the record of this. Varga's vehicles withdrew from the perimeter positions at 7:14 in the morning. She watched them go from the forecourt, 5 vehicles in total, moving down the mountain access road in the early light with the orderly patience of people who are good at their work and have now been redirected. The sedan was last. Varga rode in it without looking back. She stood on the forecourt in the full morning light and breathed the mountain air and thought about Marcus Webb, who was probably at work by now in his mid-sized midtown firm, or possibly still in bed, or possibly telling someone the inexplicable story of a dinner that had ended the way it had. She thought about the cocktail bar, the gin and tonic she'd left on the table, the $40 she'd left beside it, the green dress, still at her apartment, assuming her apartment was still in the condition Thomas's team had left it. She thought about 4 years of mornings that had begun with Adrian's schedule and ended with Adrian's schedule, and contained in the middle every logistical and operational and communicative function of an empire she'd been part of without fully knowing what it was. She thought about what she'd told Varga, rebuild or dismantle, deciding which is which. Adrian came to stand beside her on the forecourt. He looked at the mountain, the full morning version of it, the tree line sharp and the stone bright, and the sky committed finally to its color, which was the pale, clear blue of high elevation and cold air. The logistics divestment, she said. Yes. 6 months, that's a process I can organize. He looked at her. That's not your job anymore. I know what my job is, she said. I'm saying I can organize the divestment process. Because I understand the system it runs through, and I understand the operational geography, and I know what documentation the transfer requires. She looked at him. As a professional engagement with defined scope and appropriate compensation, not as your assistant. He held her gaze. What are you then? She thought about it, genuinely, for a moment. Someone who built something she needs to understand completely before she decides what to do with it, she said. And someone who is going to need time, with all of it. With you, with the accounting of 4 years. Yes, he said. And I need you to not manage the time, she said. I need you to let it be the actual amount of time it takes and not optimize it. I understand. Do you? He was quiet for a moment, the honest quiet, the one that meant he was considering it genuinely rather than preparing a response. I understand it as a principle, he said. I will likely default to optimization instinctively, and you will probably need to tell me when I'm doing it. I can do that, she said. The morning settled around them. The estate behind them was beginning its quiet day. Margaret moving through the interior, the operations room personnel returning to something closer to ordinary function, Thomas somewhere drafting follow-up communications that would turn a 5 in the morning forecourt agreement into a documented structure with real-world teeth. The perimeter markers on the topographic display would be cycling through their rotations, the personnel professional and methodical, the systems doing what systems do when the acute crisis has passed, and the chronic one, the ongoing work of maintaining anything, resumes. Weeks pass the way weeks do when you are doing hard work on something complicated. Thomas located the full extent of the monitoring access Marsh had built into the system architecture, and Sienna dismantled it. Not in 1 session, but in 12, working carefully and precisely through the structure she'd built, identifying each node that had been compromised, removing the external access points, and rebuilding the internal logic around the gaps. It took 23 days. She found, on the 14th day, a secondary access layer that she hadn't known to look for, something Marsh had embedded in a section of the architecture she'd built in week 3, before she'd gotten to the parts she was proudest of, when the system was still somewhat rougher. She sat with it for an hour before deciding what to do with it, and what she decided was to tell Adrian immediately, which she did, and which he received without managing, which was progress. Victor Hale did not return. The 6-month financial arrangement was administered through Thomas, who handled it with his characteristic precision and without commentary. Hale opened a logistics consulting firm in New Jersey 6 weeks after the mountain. It was small and legitimate, and had nothing to do with anyone in this story, which Sienna considered a satisfactory outcome for everyone involved. The federal prosecutor's office received a follow-up communication, carefully worded, technically accurate, that contextualized the original transmission as a proactive disclosure in an ongoing compliance review. The AUSA assigned to it filed it in a way that kept it accessible without making it urgent. Whether it would become urgent again someday was a question that belonged to the future, which was the appropriate place for it. The attorney on Park Avenue acknowledged receipt and filed the documentation according to standing instructions. He asked no questions, which was why he'd been selected. The journalist asked questions. She was good at her job. The questions were met with a statement from Thomas that acknowledged the transmission, provided selective context, and said, with precision, nothing that constituted either confirmation or denial of anything specific. The journalist published a story 3 weeks later about Varga's financial infrastructure that was substantive and damaging, and that she had clearly been working on independently for some time. The transmission had provided at most direction. The work was hers. The logistics divestment closed in 5 months and 4 days, slightly ahead of the 6-month window, because Sienna had organized it, and she was good at organizing things, and the scope was defined and the compensation was appropriate, and none of that had changed regardless of everything else that had. In the 6th month, on a Thursday evening in late autumn, when Manhattan had decided to be genuinely cold for the first time since March, Adrian asked her if she wanted to go somewhere. She asked where. He said, West 52nd and 6th Avenue. She looked at him for a moment with the specific look she had developed for moments that required her to assess whether he was being deliberate or was operating on instinct. He was being deliberate. She could tell. "You want to go back to the bar?" she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's where things went wrong," he said, "and I'd like to have a version of it that's different." She considered this. "That's not how that works," she said. "You can't overwrite the first version by doing a second one." "No," he agreed, "but you can add a second version to the record, and the record becomes the whole thing." She looked at him for a moment longer. "No bodyguards," she said. "No." "No tracking application." "I removed it 6 weeks ago." She hadn't known that. She filed it, in the column of things he'd done without announcing them, the small deliberate corrections of old habits. The column had been growing for weeks. She'd been keeping track. "I'll need to change," she said. "Take your time," he said. And he meant it, which she knew because his body didn't carry any of the impatience of a man managing a weight. He sat down in the chair in the corner of the office, the chair that was technically a guest chair, but that she had begun to think of as his chair because he had started sitting in it in the evenings when the day's work was winding down and the building emptied and there was no particular reason to leave. And he picked up a document from the side table and read it, and he waited. She went and changed and came back, and they walked out into the cold Thursday evening and took a cab, not a car service, which was a choice that cost him something by way of habit, and that she appreciated without saying so because some things are appreciated in silence. Lore and Rye was the same. Dark wood and amber lighting and bartenders who remembered drinks. The table by the window was available, which felt either like coincidence or like something else. And she decided it was coincidence because that was the honest interpretation. They sat. The waiter came and she ordered a gin and tonic without deliberating. She'd decided, the first time, and the decision still held. And Adrian ordered something she'd never seen him order in 4 years of coffee and water and occasional scotch at formal dinners, which was a glass of whatever the bartender recommended. And the bartender recommended a rye old-fashioned, and Adrian said fine, and she watched him receive this small relinquishment of control with the particular combination of discomfort and willingness that she had come to recognize as his version of trying. They didn't talk about any of it immediately. They talked about other things. The divestment closing, Thomas's new organizational framework, a building acquisition that was straightforward and clean and had nothing complicated inside it. The ordinary conversation of two people who work together and have built, over time, a language for the work that is also a language for the other thing, the unnamed adjacent thing that exists in the spaces between the professional. The bar was warm. The city was outside being its ordinary, relentless self. The evening had no armed security and no rival operatives and no phones with messages from people who already knew things they shouldn't and no tracking applications and no 11-minute arguments in the front seats of armored vehicles. Just the ordinary ambient wait of two people in a bar on a Thursday, with the full complexity of a particular 4 years sitting between them, not resolved. Some things don't resolve. They become part of the structure, load-bearing in their own way, but present and named, and neither of them pretending otherwise. He looked at her. The look he'd been giving her since the mountain, not the one from before, not the managed professional attention or the controlled inventory scan. The one that was just his eyes on her face, acknowledging that she was a person in the room who mattered to him and that this fact was no longer being managed. "I'm going to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to hear it as information, not as something I'm asking you to respond to." She set her drink down. "All right. When you were in that corridor," he said, "the north corridor, when Thomas told me you'd gone through the north door." He stopped. The pause was not for effect. It was for accuracy. He was finding the precise words for a thing that had happened inside him that was not an easy thing to find precise words for. "I have managed organizations and assets and people and situations for 20 years. I have been in situations that required a particular kind of sustained control to survive, and I have consistently survived them." He stopped again. "In the North Corridor last month, I spent 11 seconds unable to function." She looked at him. 11 seconds, she said. "Yes." "Like 11 minutes, she said. "Outside the bar." He looked at her steadily. "Yes, like that." She picked up her drink, held it, thought about 11 seconds. The specific weight of a man who has built his entire operational existence on the premise that control is what keeps the things he values safe, discovering for the second time in 1 month that control has a threshold, and past that threshold is something else, something older and less organized and entirely ungovernable. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it the same way." "All right." "I wore this dress the first time because I was trying to prove something," she said. "That I had a life outside the work. That I was more than the function I'd been performing for 4 years. She looked at the window, the city moving past it, indifferent and continuous. "Tonight I wore it because I wanted to. That's the difference." She turned back to him. "That's the version of tonight I want in the record." He looked at her. The amber light of lore and rye doing what amber light does, reducing everything to its essential warmth, stripping the strategic and the managed and leaving whatever is underneath. "Then it's in the record," he said. She reached across the table, not impulsively, deliberately, the way she did everything that mattered, with the full weight of a decision made. She put her hand over his on the table and felt him go still under it, in a way that was different from every other stillness she'd witnessed. Not the stillness of control, but the stillness of something received, something let in. Outside, Manhattan continued at its usual velocity, building and unbuilding itself in the cold, pressing forward, looking nowhere back. Inside lore and rye, at a table by the window, 2 people sat with their hands together on the table and the full, complicated, true record of 4 years between them, and neither of them looked away, and neither of them pretended the record was simpler than it was. And the evening held them in its ordinary amber warmth without asking anything of them except to be exactly where they were, which, after everything, was enough, which, after everything, was the whole thing.